Hello and welcome everybody to episode 28 of the 6 Pixels Under podcast. I am NerdSlayer, or NS, your host. And on this week's podcast, we will do a quick recap of our Death of a Game on the Secret World, which just recently came out 2 days ago. We'll also talk about Hearthstone and how is Hearthstone doing in 2019. We will talk about the whole Bioware story and Anthem drama with articles being written about, employees testifying that, or rather letting certain journalists know about the working conditions that they were under when constructing Anthem, how little vision there's so much to talk about in regards to Anthem. It's still a huge story. And we'll talk about that. We'll talk about BioWare's response to all of the critiques and possible the expose, if you will, that Jason did on the company. In the MMOs and the Go segment later on, we will talk about Guild Wars 2. They put out a bit of a what's next for us, which is important, of course, because they recently had some significant layoffs at ArenaNet. So we want to see what the future of Guild Wars 2 is. We will talk about Square Enix possibly working on a new MMO, and this is at the moment rumors, but pretty good rumors. And then finally, a couple other things along the journey. At the end of the podcast, usually we have a call-in segment where we allow you guys to ask questions. You can ask them by adding me in chat, adding Card in chat. Card is my moderator on duty, I guess you would say, today for taking any questions. You can also ask me a question in Discord if you'd like to join my Discord. It's www.discord.gg/nerdslayer. All right, now that we've got the plugs and now that we've got all of the official stuff out of the way, let's get into our first topic of the week. Hello, everybody. Hello again, I guess I should say. It's good to see you guys or talk to you guys. I always look forward to doing my podcast on Monday mornings. Even though I'm not a morning person, you guys make it manageable for me. Thank you for the resub. Thank you for the resub, Lions. That's 7 months in a row, man. I appreciate that. Okay. So the Secret World, let's talk about that, right? So that video, if you guys can't tell, I got a little bit of a haircut. Hat's looking sharper today, I guess you would say. But the Death of a Game that I did on the Secret World, that one took me quite a while because of some personal stuff, but also because it was one of those stories that I wasn't really quite sure originally on how to handle it, but then it kind of played itself out after you. I mean, really, I could just tell you guys like how the process works for me. Whenever you start researching a game that that you're going to cover, in the case of the Secret World, it's a game that I've played before, so I have more of a personal history with it. Whenever I decided that I wanted to do a video on the Secret World, I knew that for me it was going to be a story about telling the greatest strengths of the game while also highlighting its greatest weaknesses, which in my opinion are basically interchangeable. When you have a story-based game that does well, it's awesome, right? But as soon as the game starts to not do so well and not make as much money, then no longer can it produce the same level of quality or story content that it originally could have. So I will go ahead and just go into a couple of the points that I wish that I brought up in my video that I didn't bring up. For those who haven't already seen the video, what are you waiting on? Go watch it. But I would probably say that my biggest criticisms of myself were that I didn't mention that whenever Secret Worlds Legends happened, which is like the reboot, if you will, it actually wiped characters. It allowed them to keep some customization and also keep the achievements for things that they unlocked. Or sorry, the items for the achievements that they had unlocked, but they didn't let them keep the achievements. And they also made them redo their characters completely. That was one thing that I wish that I had mentioned, because it was obviously a pretty big deal, considering, imagine if you spent years building your character, then all of a sudden they're just like, hey, we remade the game, and they didn't really remake the game, and the next thing you know, you lost your character, your original character. Yeah, it pissed people off. That's sort of one of those things that I wish that I had mentioned, because it definitely did piss a lot of people off. Other things, there was a particularly good point that's such a simple point, but sometimes the simplest things are the ones that really resonate with you. But it was when somebody said to me, I wish you would have shown a particular quest off in the video, and I think that's a good idea that I wish that I would have. I thought of like 1 or 2 quests in particular that I could have shown like more so on screen, and we've shown bits and pieces throughout, but I wish that I would have thought of that. I think it's a cool idea whenever I'm covering a particular MMO or multiplayer game or company to highlight in particular whatever they do right? So it would have been cool. And sure, I talked a lot about it, but showing it is just different, right? There's just something different about showing it that resonates more. But yeah, I didn't have a whole lot of issues in this video. I feel like it's kind of one of those stories that's a little bit less controversial, if you will. Just because Funcom is often known as a company who starts strong and kind of finishes quite weak. You can do a follow-up. What did you say? You can do a follow-up video with a quest highlight. Follow-up videos are, I don't know, like, I'm kind of getting to the point where I'm wondering if I should do stream highlights, because people ask me, like, why don't you do some of your, particular rants and put those in videos? And I don't know, I'm not really sure why I don't. I think it's because the production's not quite where I want it to be, and so maybe I'm like self-conscious about that. But at this point, it's like after you get to a certain level of quality, it like becomes so hard to come back down. And doing stream updates, if you will, is not necessarily the kind of content that I like to do, right? But it's also like I should also do some shilling for my Twitch audience, to a certain extent at least. Somebody said something early. Oh, Ludens, thanks. I appreciate that. I do love this shirt. This is my gorilla shirt. Those who. All right, so let's go ahead and get. I think honestly, there's not a whole lot to cover about the death of a game, Secret World. But any of you guys have any questions about that video in particular? I guess before we pivot to something else, because yeah, I mean, not a whole lot of drama in this one. It seemed like I'm getting better at disarming arguments before they happen. So putting things in the description, like the name of the series, the description of it, sources, things like that. It's much harder to just purposely misinterpret. It's not main course, but a supplementary one. Yeah, you know what? I don't know. We'll have to think about that one. That's one that I'd like to do a poll over. To see everybody in chat, what's your opinion of, like, you know what? Can one of you guys do a poll for me? That'd be awesome. Sorry, I forgot to say that we have Zila in chat, who we just recently modded for the podcast. So let me mod him in chat here. Actually, does it let you see what somebody's name is? Oh, here it goes. We're doing it live. We're doing it live. Okay. There we go. All right, I moderated you in chat, and I'm gonna have to say your name right eventually. Zila. Does Zila work or is it Zela? I can never remember. Never take it personal if I say your name. By the way, I say so many people's names. I'm not the best at saying. Oh yeah, what did the Danes think of my poor pronunciation of Ragnar Fernqvist? Right, that's the best that you're gonna get out of me. Fernqvist. Sorry, Limp Boss, man. I failed you. All right. Anyway, let's jump into the Hearthstone topic that I wanted to briefly go over, because it got me thinking. We've talked about TCGs on the podcast. We talked about it last week. We talked about really just the status of these TCG games in the multiplayer, I guess, ecosystem or environment. And we didn't really talk a whole lot about Hearthstone. And I think that that's pretty interesting because Hearthstone's definitely one of those games where it had a very strong start, and it had a strong start for at least like the first 2.5 years. Slowed down a little bit, but then kind of picked back up through some more expansions and such like that. What I found interesting, though, about Hearthstone is, unlike MTG, it doesn't necessarily feel like whenever you build up your deck, you're building up nearly the same kind of, like, I guess, trading card repertoire, if you will. And thanks for the sub, by the way, Azia. I appreciate that. Hearthstone, it's it's a game that inherently costs more money due to the way that it's structured. It's a free-to-play game, but it's a free-to-play game that basically at the higher levels, you're not gonna play it free, right? You're not gonna play it free. There's no way that you're gonna end up playing that free. Oh, Card, thank you for gifting that to him. I appreciate that. That was nice of you. And like the question here is presented by Daniel Friedman of Polygon. He says, or asks rather, who can still afford to keep up with Hearthstone? And frankly speaking, I think that this is a pretty interesting question. At first glance, we could all say, oh, come on, Blizzard, Hearthstone, it's fine. It's doing successful enough. We don't have to worry about that. But after a while, you start to wonder, can I still make that assumption blindly? And I think it's kind of getting to the point with Hearthstone where, you know, whenever I saw this article pop up, it made me think as well, like, can we still just assume that it's doing pretty well? Because at this point, we don't have like a whole lot of metrics when it comes to anything Blizzard, right? I mean, typically without like data miners and WoW and stuff like that, like we wouldn't even know what their population is unless they were like doing like they used to do, which is revealing it to everybody when they had like 10 mil or whatever, 7 mil whenever they had big numbers. Now, as the article kind of goes on to explain, and I'll link this in chat for those who want to follow along. A high cost of entry this guy cites. He talks about standard mode is where all the action is. There's a card rotation. Talks about there's a new Rise of Shadows expansion with 2 new bundles. There's the $80 bundle with 80 packs. There's the $50 bundle with 50 packs. And maybe you get enough legendaries to make the kind of decks that you want to make. I have a bit of a personal history with Hearthstone. I closed beta tested the game, and I played the game all the way up until probably this year. I stopped playing, like maybe earlier in the year. I don't think I've played since January. And I'm kind of realizing, like many other people are, is like, it's a very expensive hobby. It's because it's not really a TCG, right? Like with Hearthstone, I don't really own my deck, if you will. I can't sell it to anybody. I can't even trade it for one-to-one value. It just seems like in Hearthstone, you're just always losing money. Does anybody else get that feeling when you play the game? I can't help but feel like whenever I play it, I'm just losing money. And I never felt that way when I played MTG, or even when I played other card games like Yu-Gi-Oh! It never felt like I was just losing all of my money. Like I was just putting money into a pit and it was just kind of disappearing after a while. And that's sort of how Hearthstone feels, especially when you think in consideration of how its dust system works, which I'm sure I'll make a video about that at some point to talk about. But with the whole dust system, most people here are familiar with it, but it's the idea that if I get a legendary, a gold card, I can turn it in for 3k dust, but 3k dust, or 1k dust if I remember correctly, isn't enough to then buy another legendary. I need to save up another 3 legendaries in order to get the kind of legendary that I want. Epics, I think, offer you like, what was it, 600 to 800 dust or something like that. Like, epics are purple cards. It's one of those things where it's like, even if you get lucky enough, quote unquote, to get a legendary, if it's not the legendary that you want in Hearthstone, that's actually enough to still make you sad. Because unless you just feel like dusting it, really, and when you dust it, you're inherently losing the value of it to some extent, at least a big part of the value. It's a hard sell for people. It talks about daily quests and other different things, but it says that if you want to buy 60 to 70 extra packs, a player will spend $105 if they earn the 70 free packs in both bundles for 20% off using the discounted App Store or Amazon credit. A legendary drops roughly every 20 packs is what they say. So, oh man, that's just crazy that people actually came in here and did the math already. I love that. I guess they have to, right? They have to disclose this shit. There's a pity timer. Interesting. It's almost as if they can control the rarity or the, how would I say it? They can control the speed or frequency of which you get a certain rare card. It's almost like they could do that because they made the game themselves. It's like, yeah, that's a good point, Retanaru. It's like, even when you win, you're still losing. You win a game, you win the legendary, but you still lost the value. And so I think people are getting to the point now where the whole Hearthstone, CCG thing, the whole online card game thing, whatever you'd like to call those sorts of games, has almost reached a point to where now people are getting back to wanting the physical, especially with the rise of MTG Arena. where it does allow you in some countries to use your particular cards and turn them in for cards, just like MTGO did, Magic the Gathering Online. It's interesting to watch unfold. I wish that I could cover another card game. Unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of them to cover. And frankly speaking, the only ones that I could cover at the moment, I'm not really sure if they're going to be anywhere near what's considered dead. I mean, most people thought that Artifact would be the first card game that I would cover just based on its success, or lack of success. But I think with Valve's recent, I guess you would call it almost like a promise that they're not going to give up on the game, I don't want to make that yet. You know, you don't want to bet against a big corporation who does have a penchant or does have quite the ability in order to make a comeback. They've done it with CSGO before. They've done it with Dota before. And they've done it even with TF2 in certain respects. So I'm not going to count out Valve, and I don't want to count out Blizzard completely yet, but I am sort of wondering what is the future for Blizzard. If you think about it, with Hearthstone, after people get tired of the whole basic loop of not really getting what they're worth in cards based on the money that they spend, they're going to start wondering, why can't I actually have my own collection, right? Why can't I own my actual collection? And since Hearthstone was designed not to be able to do that, it's not like they can just add it into the game. Like, for some people, it might seem as easy just to add, like, a collection. Why not just add a collection where you actually own the cards and you can trade them with other people? Just add a trading element to the game. They can't do that because it just fundamentally changes the very, like, fabric of the game. If it's no longer a non-TCG, it plays very differently. And most importantly, it's monetized very differently. So we'll see whatever happens with Hearthstone, but I think it's fair to assume right now, as the article postulates, that it's a bit of a hard ask for people to keep playing Hearthstone. But who knows? Now I've got the detective in me thinking a little bit. Maybe Blizzard isn't really counting on reoccurring customers. And I know that sounds strange because in business you're taught that reoccurring customers are much cheaper to keep than new customers. But hear me out. It's a free-to-play game. It's much easier to attract new players. What if they're not really worried about keeping the same players as long as they can bring in another range of players to come in and basically have to go through their whole like monetization scheme? Now, sorry, scheme is a negative word for some. I don't mean to say it as if it's a pyramid scheme or something like that, but I just mean the way it's structured, right? It's less likely that a new player in the current market is going to get into Hearthstone because they know it's a lot of money in order to even get started. So you see what I'm saying? It's reaching the point to where like the barrier of entry for a free-to-play game is becoming too much, which is weird to say, but definitely an interesting observation that I hope that we can continue to keep our eyes on, I guess, if you will. Scheme is suiting. People get sensitive about the way that you phrase certain words, and I don't necessarily mean that on purpose. Sometimes I just have a flair of describing things a particular way, which definitely can get me in trouble sometimes. They disclose it for China? Okay. I don't know if that's actually true, Ludens, but thanks for letting me know. Sorry, not to imply that Ludens wouldn't know the truth, but more so to imply that my chat likes to mess with me sometimes. Card says they really need to ramp up the starting decks to get people to play from fresh, I think. Yeah, and I think the same way. I mean, it's pretty damn expensive if you want to get, as the article explains, 200 packs with a 10% chance to get a legendary. Like it seems like a lot to ask from people. Every 20 packs maybe you get your legendary. 20 packs after a legendary, 5 over the course of 100, 10 over the course of 200. It just it doesn't seem like it's really worth it, you know? That much money for that little. Meanwhile, in MTG, I can spend that money on legendaries itself. I can spend just $200 just to buy whatever specific cards that I want, right? I don't have to maybe get the cards. But maybe it's also a thing of like the market's catching up to Blizzard and Activision in this case. And we're finally sort of realizing that maybe these monetization schemes aren't exactly the ones that were, they're not pro-consumer, I guess, if you will. Because there's certainly been people who've played Hearthstone and done it with a free-to-play deck, as they call it. But has anyone here in chat done it? I've tried, and I can tell you, unless you're going to do a zoo deck, it's not very fun to play a card game without the right cards. In fact, it's kind of like the worst part about card games. I think now that Magic finally has got an online version that is accessible and popular, Hearthstone is in trouble. Sadly, I think they will double down and be more aggressive with monetization in response. Yeah, you know what? That's sort of my read on it as well. I think with MTG Arena becoming more accessible, people are starting to realize, as my friend has postulated to me before, that Hearthstone worked, in our opinion, simply because it had no competition. I mean, really, it had no competition. There was no online card game that was doing the numbers that Hearthstone was, nor had the backing of Blizzard. There just wasn't. And now we're seeing that that's not necessarily true. And after they lost one of their lead developers, people are sort of realizing that maybe Blizzard isn't the same company as it was before as well. That's another element to it, but we'll have to talk about that some other time, because Blizzard is one of those subjects where it's just like, you can cover so much about them because there's always new stories. They're always involved in something, and there's always something interesting to note about them. I mean, they're just an industry titan. Anytime you have an industry titan, there's always interesting stories unraveling. All right, so enough about card games today. Let's go ahead and talk a bit about the recent drama with Anthem. For those wondering, I personally don't necessarily love to cover Anthem all the time. I didn't even buy the game. I had no interest in buying the game, and I didn't since the very beginning of its inception, if you will, just based on a lot of the things that I saw that I wasn't okay with and whatever else. But just like in anything, you have to cover things that necessarily maybe you're not the most gung-ho about, right? And in the case of Anthem, even though I didn't play the game and I don't really find the game itself to be all that interesting, the story surrounding it is very interesting. And there's been a lot of drama concerning this. And there was a big article that was put out by Jason Schreier of Kotaku, and the article was titled, "How Bioware's Anthem Went Wrong." And if any of you haven't read this already, and I'd be shocked if you haven't, because this thing has been circulating all over the place. It's a WrestleMania coming up here. Alrighty. That's an interesting little submission move. Okay, so if you haven't already read this, I really recommend you going and checking it out, because I personally think it's worth the fedora tip. Thank you for your work here, Jason. And also for all of the employees who were brave enough to actually report shit. Like, people ask, how come you don't get more testimonies from employees, or how come you don't talk to more lead devs? And it's like, well, have you guys ever been told to talk about something that you failed at? It's not necessarily the most fun for people. And not to mention, when you're still working in the industry, you basically don't have a choice, but whenever you do want to talk about what's happening inside the industry, like telling people how the sausage is made, so to say, you kind of have to do so on the hush-hush. Otherwise, you can be blackballed, lose your job, and then maybe not get rehired, because once somebody, quote-unquote, rats, right, as some people can see it, once they rat about what's going on, people aren't going to be so likely to want to hire them anymore. In reality, when bad things happen, they get reported on. It's not personal. That's just what happens, right? It can be personal if you allow it to be personal, and that's kind of how BioWare ended up taking it. Now, I'm going to condense my thoughts about this article because it's a pretty long one, and speaking of which, let me get some water really quickly. All right, let's read through some of the amazing quotes from employees throughout this article. So as Jason, basically, in the very beginning premise, he establishes that the game was rocky starts from the very beginning. It had a rocky development that was all the... Like, basically, Anthem has been rocky from the start. Today, it has a 55 on review aggregation. Why did he say aggregation? I never hear that word, but aggregate review site, Metacritic. I always feel like is the easiest way to put Metacritic, but maybe I just talk about Metacritic all the time, but I like it because, yes, reviews aren't objective measures, but if you get enough of them, it's still statistics, right? You still have some level of understanding of what majority of people think about something. All right, so let's go through and read some of the pretty worrying or great quotes, depending on how you look at it. And here's one in particular that is, resonates with a lot of people. And I pointed this one out last week. I actually cannot count the amount of stress casualties we had on Mass Effect Andromeda or Anthem, said a third former Bioware developer in an MMO. I was combining email with interview. A stress casualty at Bioware means someone had such a mental breakdown from the stress, they're gone for just 1 to 3 months. Wow. So they take time off, I guess? Some come back. Oh, no, there it goes. Some come back, some don't. Ouch. That's never a good thing to hear at first glance, let alone, an issue throughout, basically. Within the studio, there's a term called Bioware magic. It's a belief that no matter how rough a game's production might be, things will always come together in the final months. This happened with Mass Effect, this happened with Dragon Age, etc. Wow. That's a bit scary to hear out loud. I didn't even read that quote before. Let's look for some other ones here. You are the bottom of the food chain and everything is significantly more powerful than you, said a person who worked on the game in regards to kind of like how the creative process works. The idea was going to be that there were all these levers that could be pulled internally, so there'd be different events happening at all times. It'd be outside. He's talking about they wanted to have an emergent sort of game. The final game, as Jason explains, would be nothing even close to how it was originally teased. And I mean, this is just crazy to think about. That they not only made such a big 180, but from the very beginning, it was known, right? Like, people knew that we're not really going to be able to satisfy the original expectations of what the game was supposed to be, which actually presents the most interesting thing about this whole story. And to me, the most interesting thing about the whole story is that there's a particular quote where, let's see if I can find it. There's a particular point. Sorry, I'm trying to. I wish I would have found this ahead of time. Sorry about that, guys. But oh, here we go. This quote to me just summed up the project. I think most people on the team felt like we didn't know exactly what the game was or what it was supposed to be because it kept changing so much. Stuff would take a year or two to figure out because no one really wanted to make a call on it. Basically, nobody wanted to put all of the blame on themselves. And can you blame them? I mean, I don't know if we can blame them in this case. Everyone had hard decisions to make that they had never made before. New IP, new genre, new technology, new style. Everything was new. And that's the whole thing, is that this article goes on for ages. There's reports about people being worked past the point of any type of benefit, really. I mean, past the point of return, really. Like they said, stress casualties are happening. People have no direction as to what they're working on, what the vision of the game even is. The lead writer who was teased to work on the game, Drew Capetian, who did the Revan book, who obviously wrote the KOTOR 1 series. He wrote some for the other game that he... Mass Effect, of course, Mass Effect 1. He was the big guy behind that narrative. He comes out like a week ago and says that he didn't even work on the project. So, like, I'm finding what BioWare does is they kind of find names now that are like loosely associated with creativity, and they kind of just like throw them into the box of like, oh yeah, we got this guy, like they're a chef making a steak or something. They're like, this seasoning in, throw this seasoning in, throw that seasoning in, and it's all good, right? It's gonna make the best game, period. It's like, well, if you're going to say that Drew is actually working with the project, you should probably actually have him working with the project, right? Like, if he's going to offer his expertise in creating a narrative or a story, maybe he should actually be working on the project. But that just has me really weirded out that the lead writer, who's said to be a lead writer, isn't actually a lead writer. It's like, there were already a lot of drama in this regard with Mass Effect Andromeda. I think Card's the one that actually pointed this out to me. But when you look at the credits in those games, Indigo Gaming also pointed this out to me. The credits don't even say who's working on the game. It's weird because it's like, when have we ever not seeing front and center Casey Hudson or Drew Karpyshyn or whoever the lead developer in particular. They just recently lost the lead guy from Dragon Age as well. In fact, dang, I cannot remember his name off the top of my head. I'm horrible with names, but EA is losing a lot of creative talent, and BioWare, which used to be kind of like their center of creativity for RPGs, it's losing a lot of its key members in that regard. Not to mention, I forgot the other issue of, because EA wants them to use the Frostbite, and most people think it's because it's a proprietary engine, maybe it's cutting costs. I can't claim to know why they're using Frostbite, but it's not really an engine that's made for a game that's trying to be more so an RPG compared to being a shooter. I mean, it originally was designed for shooters, right? And there's a particular quote in the actual article here where it says, part of the trouble was, in regards to Frostbite, was that if you could do enough in the engine to hack it to show what was possible, but then get the investment behind it to get it actually done, took a lot longer. And in some cases, you just run into a brick wall. And then this amazing quote, Frostbite is full of razor blades. I mean, man, you're forcing people to use a particular kind of engine that isn't really made for it. They have to kind of jerry-rig it. You're not giving them enough time nor leadership in order to actually know what they're trying to work on. And then you're overworking them because of all of those issues compounded. And this, of course, blew up on the internet. This particular article had 11K upvotes on the game subreddit. That's a pretty damn popular article. And I mean, it has like, I think 2,000 comments on this thing. This thing blew up as a story. And now, we've talked a bit about this. I'm not going to go into the whole thing because it is a rather long article. But I do want to bring up something that is very interesting to me, and that's BioWare's response, or lack of response, really, towards this article. Enter this article. The plot thickens, am I right? It really does feel like it thickens. Sorry, let me... Oh, you'd like to call in regarding the article about Anthem, Ulysses? Okay, let me get into a little bit of this really quickly, though, before I bring you in. I'm open to that as well, don't worry. All right, so this was a BioWare response to the Kotaku article, which in reality, it's actually incorrectly labeled because it technically wasn't a response, unless Jason had given them the article ahead of time, which is very common in journalism. So it's common or possible that Anthem, or EA in this case, BioWare, I guess if you want to talk about their subsidiary, it's possible that they knew about this article being published and kind of had a response already set up. But people are postulating that they didn't actually read it and they just responded as soon as negative stigma or negative press came out, if you will. Let's dive into BioWare's response to all of the recent accusations. And remember, if we haven't already made it abundantly clear, the accusations throughout the article that Jason worked on are accusations of poor management, accusations of poor work conditions, accusations of poor project management, so not just management as in people, but also with the project itself, lack of direction / no direction / nobody wanting to take any fault for anything. And can you blame them? They don't want to get fired, right? So there's a lot of big issues there, right? Those are some pretty big issues in regards to making games, period. And so those issues being raised should be an alarm bell for many people that BioWare isn't the same company that we thought that they were, or at least many people still think that they are, on name value alone. So BioWare put out this response, if you would like to call it that, kind of like, I don't really know what their end goal was here, but let's go through a couple of the statements that stood out to me. We'd like to take a moment to address an article published this morning about BioWare and Anthem's development. We wholeheartedly stand behind every current and former employee of our team that worked on the game. That's good, I guess. Let's see. Sorry, that's a PR response, guys. That's why I laugh. I come from corporate, so I laugh at PR responses. Sorry, it's nothing personal to BioWare. We chose not to comment or participate in the story because we felt that there was an unfair focus on specific team members and leaders who did their absolute best to bring this totally new idea to the fans. We didn't want to be part of something that was attempting to bring them down as individuals. We respect them all, and we built this game as a team. All right. You can already guess what kind of article this is going to be. And this is going to be a giant big PR response of people saying, hey, we support our team. we accept all criticisms, but we don't really accept all criticisms. I mean, they literally say that in the article. It says, we accept all criticisms, especially from our players. That's like a way of saying, like, only from our players. But hey, they say they accept all criticisms, and yet, why didn't they accept the criticisms that were fairly levied against them? Well, because they didn't want to work with people who were just going to tear down particular individuals or particular team members. Right. Right. All right. So, when it comes to video game journalism, Jason, in this case, working with Kotaku, did a lot of work where he reached out, found a couple Bioware employees to pick their brains in emails. He did some work based on, finding timelines, talking to particular people, and finding out what the initial goal and vision of the project was itself. Right? There's a lot that goes into making such an article. And now, in some cases, a company like Bioware can actually choose to work with them. And you might ask, well, why would a company work with someone who's doing kind of like an expose against them? Well, it's because you can get ahead of basically whatever problems there is. So you can kind of like address things first and be on the front lines to addressing these issues. In the case of games journalism, this very rarely happens. It's like you have to pull the curtain back in order for people to see things in games. And I think that that's because maybe our industry is still kind of new in some respects. But basically, long story short, in order to make change happen in the video game industry, you kind of have to tell everybody that it stinks, right? Like you have to show everybody that somebody took a deuce in the living room. That's sort of like the only way it works at the moment, because really at the end of the day, with these massive conglomerate publisher companies like, Activision, Blizzard, or in this case, Electronic Arts, they have a lot of money and they need to make a lot of money. So they have a certain expectation of how they're going to monetize things, how they're going to structure things, how big their games are going to be, right? Because they're always going to put a lot of money into marketing them, etc., etc. In the case of Bioware, the problem that I have with this response from Bioware itself is that it's almost like you're getting mad that people are reporting that you did bad things. Like, it's kind of like, let's say I rob one of you guys right now, and I'll put it on record, I'm not going to rob any of you guys right now. Allegedly. No, I'm just kidding. But let's say I rob one of you guys right now, and one of you guys make a post saying, hey, NS robbed me. This YouTuber guy robbed me. And here's the evidence or whatever else. Here's some testimonials from that. If I were to come out and say, you know what, I didn't want to be a part of that investigation. I felt like it was really just trying to tear me down. It was trying to say that I was a robber, that I was a thief. And I'm just not all about that kind of stuff. It's like, well, you're just calling me what I was, which was a thief. And so in this particular case, Anthem as a project was ran very poorly. This is very well documented at this point, and it's basically explained when you play the game. And Card's one of the few in chat who played the game, left a review on it. And Card's a person that I think can be very, very patient when a game's trying to do something in particular. And I think his end conclusion, reading his review on the game, was that it's just, it's not worth it, right? It's not worth the time, it's not worth the drama, it's not worth the money. And I think that's the majority of people's concerns with it. But it's like, okay, you run a project poorly, you work your people into stress overloads where they're having to quit or take time off, you incorrectly say that certain key members are working on the project, then don't alert people whenever they're no longer working on the project, which to me is always a red flag. It's always a red flag. Why don't people tell you that Drew Karpyshyn isn't working on the project anymore? Why didn't BioWare tell us that? Does anybody want to guess here, or do I need to guess? Because I can guess that it's because they didn't want the negative publicity that goes with that. It'd be another negative story as, oh, Drew left Anthem. And by the way, there was a story on it. I just don't think it was very much covered, because I do remember talking about it at some point that it was mentioned. But I only knew about this because Drew himself came out on Twitter and tweeted that, no, I did not work on that project. So we have issues of mismanagement with employees, mismanagement with projects, creative mismanagement, no leadership, right? These are very common issues, but these are all put under a fucking microscope when it comes to Bioware, because they're already under a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, because frankly speaking, Mass Effect Andromeda didn't do so well. Anthem isn't doing so well, right? So those issues are all expounded upon. And frankly speaking, the idea that because Jason took the time to actually do journalism and talk to people and figure out if all of these stories are true, and then reached out to Bioware and allowed them to be part of that story, and you guys chose not to, and now you're basically going to have the response of like, oh, we didn't want to because we didn't want to tear people down. Okay, well then how about this? How about you stop doing shitty business practices? How about you stop making shitty games and then selling them to people on false promises? How about you stop treating your employees like shit? And then on top of that, how about you stop acting like you're the same company when we just know you're not the same company anymore? And I don't want to put all of the blame on Bioware. If it sounds that way, that's because Bioware, unfortunately, is the shield in this case. And what I mean by that is the way EA operates, and has nearly always operated for as long as I can remember, is if they own you, it is your fault. You get the blame. That's just how it goes, right? Like with EA, it's this company's failure, this developer's failure. We're shutting this company down. EA doesn't shut down. They don't shut themselves down. Like they're not penalizing themselves. They're going to make as much money as they possibly can make. Hence why they're trying to still, to this day, fight loot boxes in court, right? Because they want them to be legal so they can keep making money off of them. It's just, I don't want to put all of the blame on Bioware. So sorry if it sounds that way. But it sounds that way because, unfortunately, Bioware is the company on the front lines that's going to take the majority of the brunt force. And the unfortunate truth is that EA is very aware of that. They know that. In the same way that whenever Apex Legends did well, and EA came out, even though Respawn said originally EA had nothing to do with this game, EA makes a front page press release celebrating to the heavens that, oh, Apex Legends, great game, woohoo! And that's because of money, right? And now all of a sudden, I don't see Electronic Arts' name anywhere here. I mean, look at this thing. If it sounds like I'm pissed, I am pissed. But seriously, I'm on BioWare's website here. I'm reading a post from BioWare that's supposed to be defending this whole expose article about them. And I don't even see Electronic Arts mentioned a single time in this. Is it literally taboo to mention your publisher, the company that owns you? Like, is it taboo to mention them? Why isn't Electronic Arts mentioned a single time in this, dude? I'm sorry, but that rubs me the wrong way. It has me pretty scared as to why you wouldn't see that. Why wouldn't they mention Electronic Arts is very dedicated to blah, blah, blah. You don't see any of that. It's just like BioWare, BioWare, it's BioWare, it's BioWare. And, all right, let's slow it down here. I don't mean to sound depressing here, but think about this. One thing that I said a number of years ago was, when it comes to how a developer ends up being after they're acquired, especially by a company with a serial history of shutting down companies and projects like EA, it's sort of you're always on thin ice. And when Mass Effect Andromeda didn't necessarily work that well, the first thing that I said in regards to that was, I'm worried about BioWare. I'm worried about BioWare because now they're in a pressure situation where they kind of have to put a diamond in the rough out. Otherwise, they're going to get into a lot of trouble. The problem is that people have such high expectations of BioWare that they can't just do mediocre. They have to do great. And then the worst problem about all of this is that all of that burden goes onto them as a company, and not the company behind them who's basically pulling all of the strings. So the saddest, in my opinion, most sinister aspect of all of this is that at the end of the day, Electronic Arts can mostly, I mean, consumers are a lot more educated these days than they used to be, and really consumers are doing a lot more than they have in the past in the video game realm, if you will, of trying to make sure that they let people know, like publishers in this case, that these certain business practices aren't safe, nor are they warranted or wanted. It's just, man, I can't help but get a little bit emotional thinking about, it sucks because really at the end of the day, we know how this journey ends, right? We kind of know how it ends, and it doesn't end so well. It's not the best story. I might cover this for a living, right? I might make videos about this, and someday I might make a video about BioWare. But it's sad, right? It is sad to think about for sure. Thank you for the subscription, Sakito, and yes, tips Fedora indeed. I appreciate that. Keep tipping that hat and wagging that finger. Thanks, Alonis Born 1991. I appreciate that. Do I think that BioWare's company culture was healthier during Ray Mizuka and Greg Zeschek's leadership? I mean, absolutely. It was a completely different company, right? Like, whenever the original founders of a company basically, like, divorce themselves from the company that they completely started and founded themselves, I'm sorry, it's just rarely ever a good thing. It really is rarely ever a good thing, especially when those particular guys in particular were RPG fans. Like, we knew who they were. They played RPGs. They liked RPGs. They were involved in that community. And so there's a lot more of a personal relationship with those kinds of developers. And frankly speaking, like in the case of Ray and Greg, those are just founders. I mean, do we want to go down the list of lost developers? I mean, really, we could pull up BioWare right now. And we could look at their company. All right, so BioWare, let's see. We can even just go through quickly to see how many people they lost. All right. In 2014, Casey Hudson left. Let's see. Chris Wynn, Chris Schlurf, David Gator, who's the guy I was talking about earlier, the lead producer behind... Actually, he's the lead creative director, I think, behind Dragon Age. Apparently, I mean, they just put a writer, but I'm pretty sure he's the narrative designer for the game. So he's not just a writer. He's like the writer. They lost David Gator. They lost, obviously, Drew Karpyshyn. That's a pretty well-known one. They lost the two major founders, right? They lost those two guys. What else are we missing here? I mean, those four names I mentioned are four huge names at the company. Oh wait, there's more. A little bird that was kind of like the driving force behind a certain project. I'm not sure if you guys have ever heard of it, but Star Wars: The Old Republic. James Olin, remember that director? He doesn't work there anymore. That's the guy who was a lead designer and creative director on the best games that the company did. The best games, guys. He's not working there anymore. That's the lead designer who worked on those projects. The lead writer, he's not there anymore. Do you see what I'm saying? It's sad to point it out, but it's true that BioWare just isn't the same company it was anymore. And that's becoming more so by the day abundantly clear. All right, I'm going to drag in Ulysses. Let's see what he's got to say concerning the Anthem and BioWare drama. Hey, what's up?
Hey, so in relation to the story with BioWare and Anthem, so I'm a very process-oriented thinker, and it's obvious to everybody that there was a management
Thank you,
failure.
ComradeCage, by the way, for
After having read the article,
I appreciate that.
seems
Door
like
tip.
this whole project really kind of died in committee. There was this sort of they discussed it for what did they say, like 5 years before they ever even got started on the actual project, the serious work. And I have to, and the thing I've been thinking about is whether the problem is with the committee or with design by committee itself, because I've seen in different games it go both ways. I've seen lead designers who basically make all the decisions and do good and screw it up, and I've seen projects led by teams and design teams that also do a good job or screw it up. And I was basically wondering what your thoughts on that philosophy are, which is better or worse.
Sorry, is that your question, or is that just a point?
That's my question. Is do you think that the problem is with design by committee itself, or with the committee at?
I think it's kind of like, you know, and I know you have a bit of a history with business as well, so maybe you can kind of see my perspective, but it's sort of one of those things where it's like, if you want to create a project, period, you need somebody who's sort of willing to take the majority of the negative and positive, I guess you would say, stigma that goes kind of hand in hand with creating a new IP or a new project. I didn't see anybody in the case of Anthem take the lead. And I mean, really, like, think about it. Like, we know who's the lead behind Mass Effect. I know who it is. Like, everybody knows, like, you have basically two main guys. And those are the ones that we typically associate with the game. Same thing goes into consideration with, like, SWTOR or even KOTOR 1. Like, we know the main names behind. We know James Olin. We know Drew Karpyshyn. We know those guys. Like, we know those names. Those are names that have been around and been circulating for some time. In the case of Anthem, they tried to introduce some old names, I feel like, just for, like, the name value alone. But we never actually had anybody who stepped up and said, you know what? I'm the lead designer. I'm the creative vision here. Like, this is how we're going to do it. And I can't help but feel like, Ulysses, that's because, sort of like you were saying, they looked around and saw what they had to work with, and they were like, yeah, I'm not putting my name on this shit. They're just like, no way.
I think so too. After having read the article, I think that they were left with a void that they never were able to fill with people willing to take both responsibility and decisive action on anything. It appears that there used to be a functional design by committee system in place, and then whenever those original people, no one ever stepped up. I know that I forget who said this, but if a studio lives long enough in this industry, eventually it will come to be run by its fans. And sometimes that works and sometimes it doesn't. Unfortunately, I think that the people in the highest level positions at this point in BioWare just couldn't live up to that standard.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth mentioning, and I'm not going to go too much into it because it's a little bit of conspiracy theory, but one thing you often see after companies get acquired is whenever, like, certain creative talent kind of, like, quietly leaves, no new creative talent oftentimes is kind of, like, interjected into the company or into the scenario, period. And in this case, like, I'm not seeing any new, like, creative guys who are, like, the new face, if you will. And it's like, I can see that in other companies, like Ubisoft has guys who are still the creative lead, the creative director. They're the face behind something. You look at, I always forget his damn name, but it's something Balrog, the guy that did God of War 3. To me, he's a perfect example of that. Whenever I went and saw him do a speech at, I think it was E3, actually. He did one with James Gunn. They were talking about narratives and how to create stories and whatever else. And both of them are very outspoken people, as most people know. And they're also adamantly, this is my vision and this is how it's going to be. And I mean, Balrog literally told people at SOE, he told his handlers, if you will, he told them, he was like, trust me. If you trust me, we're going to have success. And of course, it worked and smashed, flying colors for God of War 3, or God of War 4. But I think that obviously, BioWare at the moment doesn't have a Balrog. They don't have a James Olin. They don't have, really, they don't even have Casey Hudson. They don't have the same kind of guys working at the company that they did before. And not just that, but they haven't added any new ones, nor like elevated any to the next level. Because if you just treat your kind of like, I don't know, your employees as kind of like replaceable inherently, I think it kind of, like you and I have been pointing out, it makes it to where nobody actually wants to take fault. Because like, I don't know about you, but I've worked with many projects before where I'm kind of like, you know what, you can kind of like, you don't have to put my name in the credits on that one. Like,
yeah, sometimes office politics pans out where people can see it coming down the pipeline, do everything that they can to keep their name off of it, unless it's a surprise success. But here's a good question then. If you think that we need a strong vision for these companies, do you think that it's EA's responsibility? They should have injected a new strong talent at the top of BioWare.
I think they kind of tried to go for that. Like someone in chat pointed out, they did bring back Casey Hudson like only 2 years after he left as the GM, but I don't know if that was because they just they needed like some positive, some positivity following the failures of Mass Effect Andromeda. But honestly, that's a good point, because it's not like Electronic Arts couldn't do like, I don't know, the whole for some reason I had flashbacks of the whole Warhammer Online marketing, where you can just find somebody who's very passionate and knows the universe particularly well, and just have them kind of wax poetic about it. And I'm surprised, yeah, they didn't find anybody in particular to do that with Anthem, but I can't help but feel like it's because they sort of knew that this game wasn't going to win over the hardcore fans. It was going to potentially maybe introduce the casual fans into something similar to like what they were trying to go for with Mass Effect Andromeda. Because they want to do like an RPG, and they want to do one with shooting aspects interjected into it, because they kind of don't have a choice since they're using the Frostbite. But I also feel like, and this is admitted in the article itself, because they keep using Frostbite, they don't actually have the engine really to create the kind of RPG experience they want to create in the first place. So there's just problems from top to bottom, really.
Well, yeah, certainly in the time frame that they actually spent making the most of the game. I know that Frostbite 3 was used for Dragon Age Inquisition, which most people who played it think it was a good game. I thought it was a good game. I think it's possible to do a good game, a good RPG in Frostbite, but definitely not with that management. Definitely not with the time scale and the management that they had on that project. Um, and another thing about EA, while we were on that, is I actually think that if it were me in charge, I would prefer that EA take the blame for these sorts of projects. I don't actually think it's a good thing that BioWare does, because at least whenever EA takes the blame, it doesn't reflect on the future games that studio is going to put out, right? And
Yep,
I think that
I agree with that
EA
actually.
has I think that EA has gotten wise to the fact that um, whenever a game fails from one of their studios, they don't deny it. They just quietly accept it, because I think that that's better in the long run for their business than allowing the studio that's going to put out more products for them to take the blame. Because right now, I don't know about you, but I'm looking at the next project that BioWare is putting out, and I don't have a lot of faith in it unless they make some serious, like, behind the hood changes to the engine, the management, some serious stuff. And that's not to say I won't, seriously look at that game, but I'm definitely not going to pre-order it.
Yeah, and I actually, you know what? I agree with you. I personally don't see a reason why Electronic Arts isn't mentioned in that post at all. Whenever they tried to do some sort of I don't even know what you call them. I guess they're almost like a public apology. I don't even know if you want to call it an
I wouldn't even
apology.
call it that.
Yeah, it
It was
seemed
a
more
bunch
like
of
a public
platitudes. It
statement.
wasn't. Yeah. It it was basically the bare minimum that they needed to do as a PR branch, right? Like, that was like they had to say something, I think. I don't think that they could have gotten away with saying nothing, and I think that they just kind of said the bare minimum.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And to backtrack a little bit about what you were saying earlier, I do agree that I actually do think it's worse for Electronic Arts in this case to not just take the blame for Electronic Arts themselves, because although BioWare itself isn't a publicly traded company and Electronic Arts is, so if you're gonna make that argument that shareholder, like, yeah, I can get that argument that you don't want to like hurt the stock of Electronic Arts, but put it this way: if BioWare fails, you don't think that's gonna hurt the stock? I mean, it's gonna.
Oh, it's way worse
Exactly. It's
for the
way worse
shareholders.
for them to fail as a company and people to no longer trust them.
So there's sort of this saying on Wall Street, sort of, that with stock, when it's a PR nightmare, that could be a buying opportunity. But whenever the earnings start falling, that's much more serious. That may not be a buying opportunity. And I think that this is an example of that. Whenever EA gets the blame for a studio failing and no one really knows what's going on under the hood, it's just generic blame on EA. I think that um, that pretends less for their earnings than it does whenever the studio that is actually producing their product is failing.
Yep. And not just failing, but like you're not even offering them a life raft. You're kind of just like, hey, You're on your own, buddy. That's what it seems like to me. Like this whole.
Yeah, I'm kind of baffled at this point. That EA, with as bad as the PR has been, and as bad as the public perception is, I'm baffled that EA hasn't stepped in to become the bad guy and just say, okay, there are such serious problems at this point, and the original people are gone anyways. So we're going to make systematic process changes to the way that this company handles projects. I have to assume that they're doing it on the quiet. Like I can't imagine that they're not. EA isn't stepping in and taking some changes with this studio. But I'm surprised that they haven't publicly come out and said we're going to own this, because I think that would be a better solution for everybody than allowing BioWare to sort of be the bad guy here, to look like, a rotten from the inside out company.
Yep, and not to mention, like I can see what people are saying. Like we don't even know if necessarily in this case we can blame what side, what publisher, what developer more so than the other. Like I'm not gonna sit here and say that I know for sure that EA is to blame or I know that BioWare is to blame because we don't know obviously the full story. But what I
Sure.
will say is that to me the worst thing about it all, besides the company potentially being in danger of being shut down at some point, it's the reputation. And once you lose that reputation for a company or a name or whatever else, like it's very very hard to get it back. And so that's the thing
Oh,
that I'm worrying about with BioWare in this case is like I don't really know if they can ever really fix their rep at this point unless they just completely do a 180 and then just change up how they're
absolutely.
doing things.
Absolutely. And these video game companies, I don't know, I'm sure you are aware of this. They already have labor issues with getting the best programmers and the best, people on the back end to work on their projects, because they're being stolen by, Apple, Google, all these other tech companies, to then also have a reputation of treating your employees badly. Um, that's it's horrible, because, like I was saying earlier, it's almost certain that these lower level employees who were stressed out of their job were fans. They're doing this job because they were fans of the company, fans of the intellectual property,
Hmm.
and to treat them that badly that they quit, it basically says stay away. You don't be here because you want the money, because you could go work at an Apple or a Google. Don't be here because you're fans of the company, because we're going to treat you badly and not reward you for it. I don't know. It's a self-feeding problem. It's a bad feedback loop that, like I think EA would actually be justified and probably be the good guy to step in at this point.
Yep, I agree, and I'm glad you brought that up. I think it's an interesting point, one that I didn't really think about before about whether basically is it better if the parent company takes the blame versus like the company below that, and of course like even like let's say if it truly was 100% Bioware's problem, which we know it wasn't because that's not how it works. But let's say if it was, I don't know, 100% their problem, even their response that they came out with in itself is just not good enough. So it's like there's problems, whether it's EA's fault, whether it's BioWare's fault. The point being is that there is a lot of fault, and
Right.
I don't blame people for having the response that they've had so far. And frankly speaking, I'm it sounds like a bit strange, but I'm actually I'm quite happy to see this kind of response. It makes me understand now kind of like how ignorant people are about the whole process period, really of how games are made in general, but also just sort of how games at this level and this scale are made. I feel like people kind of think of it as like, oh, it's one developer and then he just screws it up and then it's just all screwed. And it's like, maybe it was that way back when we had like 5 developers working on a game, but these days it really
Right.
is a systematic problem. And that's like to me the lesson to learn with Anthem is it's a problem of design, like you said, like the team. It's the foundation is already
There's
cracked. When the
there is
foundation of
a
a house is already cracked, not only does the value go down, but potentially it can fall down. So
right.
anyway,
It's a problem with the process, and at that point, systematic changes need to be made in order to correct
Agreed. And everybody, please thank you, or thank Ulysses for asking that question and bringing that point up. I'm glad that you did. Also, at any point during the podcast, you can, like he did, say that you want to respond to something in particular that I'm talking about, and we can just do the question part right after that, because it seems pointless to just wait to the end if people want to immediately talk about a certain subject. So anyway, thank you for coming on and asking that question. I appreciate it.
All right, thank you. Bye.
See you later. All right. All right, so that was a good one. I think that's a good way to put a bow on this, to wrap up that particular discussion. Thank you, Ulysses, for that particular point, and also talking about more so kind of the I guess looking at it from a publisher perspective. It's really like, is it better for you to take the fault yourself and maybe potentially hurt your stock, or is it better in the long run to take the short-term brunt with your subsidiary company, or developer in this case, if that means that in the future people will be less willing to buy their games, which in turn would mean that the company would fail anyway. So it's not as simple as just like, well, it's Bioware's game, so it's Bioware's fault. There's a lot more that goes into it. Let's talk about something else, though, since we talked a lot about Anthem and the drama surrounding it. In fact, let's go ahead and move to our MMOs on the go segment. We have a little bit of MMO news to go into this week. Oh, sorry, I'm all over the place. There we go. Browse. Okay. Do it live. All right. So no more Anthem talk. Yeah. The first thing we're going to get to on the MMOs on the go segment, which is of course a segment where we talk about all things MMO that I find interesting, really, or you guys present to me. And there's the particular point about what's the future for Guild Wars 2? What's next for Guild Wars 2? To catch everybody up on the story who hasn't been following it, I think about a month or two ago, they had a number of layoffs, ArenaNet in particular. They laid off, I think, like 100-something people. It was a pretty significant amount of people. We don't know if all of them were working on Guild Wars 2 themselves. Apparently, they were working on some key, like, hidden projects. So we don't know at the end of the day how much this was going to affect the development, but we certainly knew that it wasn't going to just be business as usual. It never is, right? And so they came out with this particular point where they talked about culminating in a Living World Season 4 finale, the philosophy for the game, which is encouraging players to interact positively, which to me just seems like a strange philosophy, but okay. Supporting player autonomy. Another... honestly, I feel like these are just like buzz things that are put here because I'm kind of confused by these, but I get the whole focus on horizontal progression. It works for them, and it's also unique. Striving for fun, that's the Guild Wars mantra for sure. Striving for fun, it's always been about that. And then building upon previous designs. Now, I wanted to talk about this because it's a bit of important news for Guild Wars 2, but also really I was just wondering, like reading through this, they talked about, we want to reorganize ourselves into 4 fully staffed content teams with additional teams dedicated to supporting the core game, like skills, balance, rewards, world versus world, and SPVP. So this sounds like a positive thing, right? It sounds like they're putting in a lot of effort to work on PvP and work on some new content. But then what I found weird is when I scroll down and I read the future part, they talk about rune and sigil salvaging. They talk about skill slotting systems, max cooking, world versus world restructuring, which apparently hasn't really happened yet. Some sort of tournament support. Okay, here's the important bits, right? Whenever somebody makes a post like this following a big layoff of sorts, we really want to kind of like examine it with a fine-tooth comb, because we want to know what is the actual history or what is the actual future to be, right? Because the company can come out and say, it's business as usual, we're doing everything great, but we can only really infer based on what they say, right? Or, actually observe what they actually do. And at this point, I was hoping that I'd read this and I'd be like, I don't know. I'm not going to be here. I'm not going to sit here and act like I'm idealistic enough to think that I was going to be like convinced that they're really going to change things or something like that, or they're going to add different things. But I couldn't help but read this and then kind of be like, but okay. For World versus World, we're talking about changing the matches so that scoring matters in an 8-hour interval. So World versus World has been problematic in Guild Wars 2 for fans of the game who've played in chat. They can corroborate on my story here. Since the very beginning. I mean, we've had problems with World versus World since the very beginning. And they've, over the course of like years, fixed certain aspects of it, but never truly fixed the whole unbalancing issue. And they recently tried to fix that, I think a number of months back, and I haven't played since then, so I don't have any opinion about that in particular. But it's had some problems, right? World versus World has had some problems. And not saying that it's like flawed, but just really they didn't give it enough love. And I mean, we already went into the like specifics. We know that before Guild Wars 2 didn't have a lot of people working on PvP, period. Now, when they mentioned SPVP and how they're going to be supporting it as a full, content release or whatever else, I was excited because I was like, what are they going to do with structured PvP? Like, I wanted to see, because for people who aren't familiar, the structured PvP part is the part that I have the biggest issue with the game, because as a Guild Wars 1 fanatic, the SPVP or team-based games, or game types, in that game, the matchmaking, I've gone over this before, but it's just when you look at Guild Wars 2, the sheer amount of things that you can do in that game is just mind-boggling, right? It's despite seeming like a PvE game, Guild Wars 1 has more PvP features than the majority of games. And so when Guild Wars 2 wasn't that, that's kind of why I made my video as to why I don't play the game ultimately. But anyway, I saw SPVP and I got excited. And then I scrolled down and it was like, the competitive team has been working on the idea of building a festival that highlights both SPVP and World versus World. That's a concept that would allow us to focus on those game types and try new things. So basically what they're trying to say is that we're trying to find a way to make people excited about PvP and monetize it for future content. Nothing wrong with that. But my issue is that a festival, I mean, that's all that you guys could come up with, really? I mean, at this point, guys, does anybody even work on PvP there anymore? Like, I'm sorry, I'm being serious here. Does anybody work on PvP there anymore? Because was that all they could come up with was a festival? Like, come on, guys. You have a whole game before this of tons of PvP ideas. Why can't you just, I don't know, try one of those? Festivals? I'm sorry. I'm very, very critical of roadmaps. If you guys know me, if you promise me something, it better be up to specifications. Otherwise, don't promise anything. And this reminds me of a Star Trek point in particular. I might actually employ you guys in chat to find this for me. But Star Trek Online recently came out with its own roadmap. And I wanted to show you guys how easily you can pick through roadmaps and notice just basically how pointless or useless they can be. And like, I'm not going to say that this Guild Wars 2 post in particular is a roadmap, but it is promising about future content. And I'm sorry, this was like the best way that they could think to explain some shit. Like, I mean, I'm not saying I'm going to write their press releases for them, but I'm telling them that from a design perspective and a critical perspective, when you have a very clear issue in PvP, I don't know if this really alleviates anybody's problems. And you might ask, well, why do you care? Because Guild Wars 2 is in trouble. Like, let me make this abundantly clear. Although it's doing fantastically population-wise, market share-wise, marketing-wise, and frankly speaking, business model-wise, in terms of its... I was about to use too official of a term. I was going to say permeation, but I would say more so like market share is a good way to put it. Guild Wars 2 has a great market share, and yet it's not making enough money. We've gone over this before, and there's tons of reasons, and the main reason is the business model itself. But the main reason why in the past, they haven't focused on making PvP a big focus for content is they couldn't find a way to monetize it. Because the game is basically focused on horizontal progression and not vertical progression, it's not really about being better than somebody, being ranked better than somebody, having higher skills, being unique, right? It's more so you got some different achievements, you got different outfits, you got more money, things like that. When I look at roadmaps, I'm always waiting for them to like actually address the concerns that I have with the game. And not just mine, but just general concerns, which these are general concerns. And so I talked a bit about Guild Wars 2s and why in particular I'm not a fan of these kinds of press releases. I'm going to go into detail talking about Star Trek Online's recent announcement of their roadmap to show you guys basically what my opinion is of roadmaps in general. All right, so when I scroll down here, this is how I see these things, right? All right, so here's a roadmap. Okay, upcoming content roadmap. All right, okay. All content dates are subject to change. Well, that's never a good thing to see. All right, that already has me worried. Okay, March. In March, they're going to have a console anniversary with, I think that's a quest line. In April, we're going to have an event. Awesome. I love events. Okay. In May, we're having a major update, which allows starships to level with you. Some reason that makes me want to, like, hit my fedora. How do I know it's a major update? What's major about it? This screenshot doesn't tell me anything major. In fact, this tells me everything I need to know, that it's not a major update. The point that I like to make to you guys is that don't just take everything word of mouth. Don't take everything 100%. Whenever somebody tells you, whenever a developer in this case is saying, here's the content that we have promised, don't just hear that and go, yeah, content's coming. Actually ask yourself, okay, what content is coming and is it going to fix any of the current problems of the game? Right? In Star Trek, like, you know, I bring this up for those who aren't familiar because the game technically is still alive, right? And this, you know, content roadmap, ironically enough, follows the video I did on Star Trek just a month ago. So I'm not going to sit here and say that they made this because of me. I still haven't got SWTOR to release their roadmap. And I made that video ages ago about SWTOR. But put it this way. When you guys are following a game and you're trying to wonder if it's worth sticking by or if you want to rejoin a game, you always have to look at whatever they're planning in the future. And in this case, one, you know, major update in the course of multiple months is not enough to alleviate any of my concerns. Now, maybe you guys have different methodologies. Maybe you expect, or you have lower expectations. But when somebody tells me, here's the future content that we have planned, and they tell me that they're going to add a festival, I mean, Guild Wars has always had festivals. That's not unique. There's nothing unique here. This doesn't alleviate any of my concerns about Guild Wars 2. So that's probably all I'm going to say now in that regard. And Star Trek's roadmap is even worse because, I mean, basically they're celebrating that they're going to allow you to buy things. That's kind of how Star Trek works. And hey, if that's your audience and you like that game, I'm not going to hate. But when I play an MMO, they have a certain... Put it this way. When I play an MMO, because I'm a consumer who's paying for a product, they owe to me the ability or the... Put it this way. Sorry, I'm trying to think of the best way to phrase this. When I spend money to play a subscription-based game, a free-to-play game, any game that I spend money in, and it's a multiplayer or a massive multiplayer online game, I have a certain level of expectations that need to be met. And that's just because an online game is persistent and it needs to continue to be persistent, meaning it needs to put out more updates constantly, especially depending on the kind of game that it is, right? So in the case of like Guild Wars 2, you know, you can argue that maybe the game's not for me, and so these new content updates aren't supposed to be for me. Except that many of the concerns that I see for the game are concerning its PvP features that they think are kind of lackluster. And so whenever you go into a game and you're playing Guild Wars 2 in a long, you know, term perspective for a number of years, the only thing you have to go on is basically what's the promise of the future. So whenever a developer gives you a roadmap, it's not just a roadmap, guys. Like that's so important. A roadmap is probably one of the most important things when it comes to an MMO. And that's why I kind of get offended when they put out these really shitty roadmaps, because it's just like, I mean, back in the day, we were releasing big expansions every year. And now we can get away with releasing roadmaps, which are basically just ways to make more money. It's sorry, the bar has been like significantly lowered in what we have expectations of when it comes to new content. That's my long roundabout way of saying that, and I'm not impressed. Yeah, Limpos. Back in the day, major MMOs used to have an expansion every year. Every year they would have an expansion. How would it be? How would more content be excessive? What? That's never an argument you would want to make, that content would be excessive. Content being excessive is like a good problem to have. I would love for content to be excessive in a game that I play. It never is, though, because MMOs are expensive. They're hard to work on. They take a lot of time and resources. And not to mention, you're working with a live test environment, right? Like, you have an audience that if you release a patch or an update or an expansion to that ruins the game, you just killed your alive game, because MMOs are living, breathing games. They're not just single player games. They don't have a shelf life in the same way that other games do. They don't have an infinite shelf life in the same way that other games do. They have a finite life. They are living, really. I mean, it's a living, breathing world. It just doesn't really seem that way sometimes because of, you know, particular aspects that kind of like pull you away from that, I guess I would. All right, so another thing, and this one's I guess a rumor, so put on your detective cap for this one. But there's been some recent information / reports that perhaps Square Enix is working on a new MMO. As my dude here, Admiral Gallius Rax, says, PC Gamer is reporting that Square Enix's third development headquarters has launched a new core project following Final Fantasy XIV for the next generation. According to Square Enix, this project has already finished its initial development, which is the concept phase, and is now shifting to a full-scale, large-scale development phase. Third development headquarters, formerly known as the 5th Business Division, is run by Naoki Yoshida, who, by the way, is the lead developer behind Final Fantasy XI and Final Fantasy XIV, the guy who basically saved the day with A Realm Reborn. It's that developer. The one who, like, came in and was, like, basically crying because he was so sad and ashamed of how Final Fantasy XIV initially came out. The reason why I established that is that he's a pretty damn good developer, okay? So he's not just somebody to be like, oh, it's just another, like, theme park guy. It's like, I mean, he's a pretty damn good developer, even if you don't necessarily like theme park games. Let's check out the article itself. A new core project by Final Fantasy XIV director is dubbed to be a next-gen project. That's always exciting to hear, right? And so there's actually been some more quotes that were released, I think, from this particular interview. If I scroll down here, check this out. So on GameSpot, a number of years back, I think this guy made a particular discovery. Yoshida said that he would like to make an MMO someday that may not be set in the Final Fantasy universe. He'd like to make that game before he dies. And while on the subject of dream projects, Yoshida said he hopes to be able to work on Diablo 4 someday. So, I mean, it's kind of like, I don't know if that Diablo 4 part's even really related, but I think this is very interesting. He also mentions that he wants to make a Battle Royale game, and I don't know if that's a translation thing, if he was joking or what, but that's after he said that he wanted to make another MMO. So, we could assume that those two are related, but I think it's fair to assume that they're probably not, knowing Square Enix. So, really, I don't have anything else to say except that. I mean, at this point, it's speculation. What is Square Enix working on? Obviously, it's been confirmed to be another MMO. We don't know exactly if it is Final Fantasy, period. It could be a new IP, but it's exciting to see. I don't know about you guys, but anytime I see a big AAA company still having interest in the MMO market, even if it's fleeting, I'll take my victories where I can take them, right? And I hope that this is an MMO announcement, and I hope that Naoki Yoshida is the one in charge of it, because I do believe him to be pretty damn good at having a good vision. And for people who aren't familiar with Final Fantasy XIV, it wasn't his initial vision, so please don't prescribe that entire game to him. He actually kind of showed up and just kind of like saved the day, if you will. So we don't even know necessarily if he would make another game like A Realm Reborn. In fact, if he's the lead developer, and he is behind Final Fantasy XI, it's actually incorrect to assume that he just would, right? Maybe he'll make another game like Final Fantasy XI, a team-based, difficult PvE-based game. Who knows? We will see. That's always the most exciting part, right? All right, I think I have one more bit to talk about. Let's see. All right, so an MMO that I have been following a bit is the latest game to create a Kickstarter. I don't normally advertise Kickstarters, but I figured that I'd update everybody since we did talk about it briefly before, and that's Oath did recently put out a Kickstarter of just $35,000. And I like to highlight this because, as I mentioned last time, is it possible that they don't meet their goal, which is supposed to be met in 24 days? It's possible. It's possible. And I'm not going to sit here and tell you guys that this is the project to support. I will never tell you guys to make a decision like that. That ultimately should be made by your own volition and your own research. You can just use me as a proxy, I guess, or use me as a person to test out maybe particular ideas, or to put more research into if a game is worth supporting. And I won't be the one to tell you if this one is or isn't, but the reason why I like bringing up Oath in particular, I'll go ahead and put the Kickstarter in the description, is because when it comes to Oath, like, it's one of those particular games that has a very tiny team, and because it has a very tiny team, it has to turn to Kickstarter in order to get the proper funding if it doesn't want to just rely on a typical publisher relationship. Now, I bring up Oath in particular in this case also because, you know what? There's some very annoying rhetoric that surrounds kind of like indie developers in the MMO space. And as you guys are quite familiar with me, I love pointing out not only hypocrisy, but also love pointing out when people are just completely, well, irrational. And I'll bring this point up in particular. Let's see. So I mentioned this thread last time on Reddit, and it was a thread talking about Oath in particular. And he was a guy just talking about, oh, here's the development. My friends are working on the project. Here's the Kickstarter video, blah, 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 blah. But I figured, you know, coming back to this post, why don't I just organize it by new and see if there's been any new posts in regard to, like, if there's been any new Galaxy brain takes, I guess I would say. Now, again, I've already established, as this guy has established, this is a tiny development team. Tiny. They're an indie team. They're working on a project that's only asking for $35,000 as a bare minimum for cost, right? Bare minimum for cost. And the rhetoric that you see is still so silly. So you literally just bought some generic Unity asset bundle and thinking you've made an MMORPG. That's cute. So then again, 90% of the idiots here will buy it, so might as well do asset flips. All right. So let's go over this again. In 2007 through 2011, there was the age of the WoW copycat MMOs, right? You guys are familiar with this? Early 2000s was all about EverQuest, right? In fact, let me switch this to a soapbox segment. Early developers, early MMOs, we had EverQuest. EverQuest was brought forth by a tiny company, tiny budget in comparison to most games these days. We had games like Shadowbane, which was created in J. Todd Coldman's basement, basically, like his apartment. You know, he came up with that idea in his apartment. We have Raph Koster and the team behind Star Wars Galaxies. They developed that game in an apartment as well. So that's how this all started, right? It was very grassroots. People were working out of their apartments. We had programmers doing, like, it was so Wild West back in the day. But eventually, we got to the point to where we reached the boom, if you will. WoW came out in 2004 and kind of just really just changed everything. And within the first 2 years, it got up to already, I think, 3 to 6 million subscribers, which were numbers we had never, basically we never knew that these numbers were possible. And so because this industry essentially started so, infantile-like, I guess you would say, it allowed it to be a lot more kind of risky, take a lot more risks. Very much so, the early MMOs are very risky. They are unapologetically this way. And what I mean by that is like Project 1999, which is the particular EverQuest server that was released, at launch at 1999, right when the game came out. That particular game has mechanics, say, for example, where factions hate other factions. So if you start as a Dark Elf, you'll be killed on sight by non-Dark Elves. That's just how the game works. They're unapologetic about it because they're like, this is our world, take it for how you will, and that's it. That's how MMOs started. But after WoW kind of realized you could take that formula and make it a little bit more accessible, then the age-old market shift happened. And when I say age-old, I mean this happens in every market that you can possibly imagine. It works like this. Cool guy comes up and he's like, here's my idea, sweet. Here's my MMO. And everyone's like, dude, that's such a cool idea. That's such a great game. And then a big corporation or a big company says, is there money in this? Like, could we make an MMO? Investors, other publisher relationships are like, we need to find a studio who can make us one of these games. And so that was the next age. We had publishers finding particular developers and putting out games. It was all about making money, right? That was called the era of WoW clones. Everybody was trying to copy what WoW did to get even just a small piece of that success, right? Because when you're fighting for control over a niche, you want all of it, obviously, in a perfect scenario, but it's impossible to ever own all of a niche, really, unless it's a monopoly. And so WoW didn't own the whole market, and so people were like, why don't we just take what WoW does and then just do that ourselves, and then we'll have successful games. We'll change the IP, we'll have like different features, like we'll make it more about PvP, whatever their particular thing is, right? Well, as a spoiler, those MMOs didn't do so well. Many of those WoW clones failed. And then we had a period where basically no investors, no publishers were willing to enter the MMO space without taking, they weren't willing to enter the space because it meant taking a lot of risk. So essentially, the only people who are left in the market are those who didn't take risks. So if we look at the top played games right now in MMOs, like I'm just typing in top MMOs. Elder Scrolls Online plays a lot like Guild Wars 2, which plays a lot like Terra, which plays a lot like, really, these three games are kind of interchangeable in some ways. Now, we have other games that are like maybe a little bit more out there, like Black Desert Online. Some people say it's a little bit different than Guild Wars 2. They think it's different than Terra, etc. Final Fantasy 14 is, it's WoW, except Final Fantasy 14. Like, it's not a whole lot different. Yeah, it has a higher GCD. Yeah, it's story focused more so than WoW is. Give or take, all these games listed in here have PvE raids, PvP instances, lack of open world PvP. And yes, although Guild Wars 2 has an open world PvP, it's not really open world. It's just a giant instance, right? So Elder Scrolls has that exact same system. So these games have basically the same PvP systems, basically the same PvE systems, slightly different combats, different IPs, and different publishers. And so the majority of the games that are right now in the top list, they're the biggest publishers. Perfect example. WoW is owned by Activision Blizzard, one of the biggest conglomerate companies that we could ever imagine in gaming. Elder Scrolls Online is owned by ZeniMax Online, which is then owned by Bethesda. So Bethesda, that goes without saying. We don't need to talk about how big they are. Guild Wars 2 is owned by ArenaNet, which is then published by the consensus biggest MMO publisher, NCSoft, right? Final Fantasy 14 is published by Square Enix, one of the biggest RPG companies and frankly biggest Japanese companies in general. So a reoccurring theme here, right? The biggest companies also have the biggest MMOs. And why did it become that way? Because in a market, whenever somebody comes in with their, essentially their apartment and says, hey, let's come up with this cool idea, and they come up with a cool idea, that idea is rarely refined, right? It's maybe missing some technical aspects. They maybe didn't have the resources they needed, like in the case of Shadowbane. There's a lot of problems that go into it. And so you need more money to make the kind of scale of MMO that you really want to make. The problem is that when we attracted all this big money, there was essentially, it was like Wild West in the sense that all the big publishers and investors were coming in and spending loads of money without any real knowledge of how the market worked or why WoW itself worked. And so that's how things are now. And in order for things to get back to how they were, which are, back to taking risk, back to playing very unique games, back to kind of having the more creative focused games, and not the big conglomerate, big company kind of games. Well, Kickstarter, right? That's where Kickstarter came into play, and crowdfunding and sort of things like that, early access, etc. The thing is that it's needed in order to get past the point that we're currently in. So what annoys me about the rhetoric that surrounds games like this, and again, I don't even know if Oath is the one, right? Like, I don't even know if it's the game that's going to be good. But I'm talking about the idea here. Why are people so quick to talk about asset flip? Why are people so quick to talk about scams and talk about why are you funding games that, you shouldn't be funding when, well, put it this way, guys. I'm going to play devil's advocate here. So, in fact, we hardly get to play devil's advocate here, so I'm going to put my counterpoint up on screen. The devil's advocate I'm going to play here is, let's pretend no indie developers, no indie teams decide that they want to make ambitious titles. Let's just pretend that happens. Like, none of them want to do. All the Kickstarter MMOs disappear overnight. Now, you and I, as fans of the genre, how can we ensure that we will get another MMO that also takes risk and is also unique creatively? Well, we basically don't have any way. The only way that it can happen is if slowly. Big companies, when they innovate slowly. They don't innovate quickly, right? It's too risky. They innovate slowly. So in 10 years, if all of the Kickstarter projects and all of the, indie developer projects just disappeared, in 10 years, how different would the market be? What do you guys think? Just out of curiosity. I'll tell you what my opinion is. I don't think it'd be very different. I think it'd be rather similar. And I think that that's very problematic. And that's why you need the ragtag group of developers, just like we needed back when we started the industry, to show up and be like, hey, things aren't going to be status quo. We're going to do permadeath. We're going to do PvP-focused games. We're going to do hard-focused raid games. Whatever their vision is. We're going to go back to adventure parties, like with Pantheon. We're going to make it about a sci-fi, odyssey in Star Citizen, right? Whatever those particular things are for those games, in 10 years, if all of those projects just disappear overnight, we're not going to get any of that innovation. We're not going to get any of those boundaries being pushed. And so, although there are some certain, real ramifications of Kickstarters, of early access, and of, frankly speaking, not necessarily knowing that you can trust where your money's being put, because ultimately you're just crowdfunding, right? You don't have the same security that maybe you can have if you can just issue a certain refund on Steam or whatever else. My point to you guys, though, is without these guys taking risks, without these guys asking for money because they need money in order to have funding, we're not going to get the games that we want. And so when can we stop this insanely dumb rhetoric of just painting everything with the same brush? We don't know if they're scam artists. We don't know if it's a Unity asset flip. All of that is just completely irrational to assume. And to make it now about the other game that I wanted to cover, Fractured. Fractured is another one that really I just scratched my head because I'm just curious, and I want to ask people, what do you expect? So I will talk to you guys as the audience here. Fractured, which is an MMO that I have covered before. If you haven't already seen gameplay footage on this, go check it out. It basically plays a lot like an ARPG MMO of sorts. I've been pretty high on it from the perspective that I think that they have a very realistic plan. They were successfully funded on Kickstarter, and they have an interesting dynamic where they separate 3 different factions, one of those being a PvP-centric faction, which I'm all ears for, right? So recently, Fractured announced that they're going to have an alpha test this Wednesday. Now, in order to get access to this alpha test, you have to spend $150 for the alpha pack. Now, let's pull that up really quickly. All right, if you want access to Alpha 1, you need to spend 150 euros. Sorry, that's like a little bit more than $150. That being said, to just imply that you're paying 150 for an alpha test is completely wrong. It's so utterly wrong that it literally offends me when I read shit like this. And you might be asking why. It's because, guys, the only thing we have in this world is basically the ability to read what is given to us. And what I mean by that is, as a consumer, the only thing we can judge things on is knowing what we're getting ourselves into, is educating ourselves, right? Knowledge is power, right? I know it's cheesy, but knowledge is power. Now, what I mean here is that this. Yes, you pay 150 euros for an alpha access, right? And you can have a debate of whether or not that's worth it or isn't worth it. However, you wouldn't just say that that's the only thing that you're doing, because it's literally the only thing on this list. Oh, wait. It isn't the only thing on this list. That's my point, is it's not the only thing on the list, because there's also two years of a VIP membership, which is basically a sub fee. They give you 20,000 of their in-game currency, let you reserve a guild name, and all of these other things. My point and argument to you guys is not that I know this game is going to succeed. It's not that this is even necessarily a good offer. My point is that whether or not it's a good offer is completely reliant on you as a person, you as a consumer. What's your opinion? What do you value? What are the things that you the most look forward to in a game? For many people, they love early bird prices. And let me say this again, because I know Card can back me up on this. True MMO fans, we want the lifetime subscriptions. We want all the goodies. We like the vanity. We can't help it. We like that shit, right? But I think it's annoying whenever people see like, oh, Fractured's doing an alpha test and it costs 150 euros. What a total scam. It's like, okay, well, how else are they going to sell access to their game, which is needed to then fund their game, if they don't add pledges and add incentive to have you want to spend money in the game, right? Now, I'm all with you guys if it was just access to beta. Like, if we pulled up this list and these prices were just for access to the game and not even a copy of the game, hey, I'm right there with you guys. No. We tell those developers no. But can we get mad at them when they're leveraging basically the only thing they have, which is the game, in order to secure funding to then work on the game? It's like, it doesn't follow for me. And again, this is something that's constantly mentioned throughout threads like this. And here's another one that I saw. So this is like Albion Online. Okay, well, is this like Albion Online? Let's see. Again, you might ask, why am I showing you this? Because I'm showing you how easy it is to answer questions like this. Or really, to not look like an idiot. Okay, so is this like Albion Online? Well, only one way to find out. It's almost as if you could just look this shit up. Okay, so this is how Albion Online looks. All right, so let me see some combat. Is there combat? Okay, yep. By the way, I know how it looks already. I'm doing this to show you guys an example. All right, so that's how the game looks, and that's kind of how the game plays. Maybe I'll look at some building. Oh, that's right. All building in the game is instance. For those who aren't familiar, in some way it's instant. Even out in the world, it's instanced. You can have instances for taking certain territories, right? That's kind of like what this sort of game is. All right, so now let me see. Fractured. Let's see. Is this the same game? I don't know. Only one way to find out, right? By looking. Well, he just jumped up in the air. So there's verticality in the game. That seems kind of unique. The movement is much faster than Albion. Watch this again. The attacking is faster. The animations are faster. The movement, the base movement speed is faster. There's a lot more ability to maneuver through combat without having to use big cooldowns, which, by the way, is how you play Albion. The speed is different, right? You notice how the speed is different. It plays a lot more like an ARPG. The thing that annoys me is whenever people will ask questions without actually doing any sort of research. And I realize some of you guys come to me because of that, and that's totally cool. Like, you come to me because I'm the one that does the research for you. But when you're looking at an MMO and you're trying to figure out if whether or not it's a good investment or you should support the Kickstarter, this is the only way you can do it, is basically by watching whatever gameplay is revealed to you. And so the annoying thing to me about games that are being worked on in Kickstarters or early access is that people have just completely irrational views of like their expectations of things. And, you know, to further my point of like, is this game just like Albion Online? I mean, literally in every conceivable way, besides the fact that it's an isometric game, it seems to be different. But just because it's isometric is enough for people to think that it's the same game? I don't know, is Diablo 3 the same game? I don't know, it looks like the same game to me, right? It's isometric, has like abilities and shit, and things pop up and you jump and move around. It's like, it's a different game. All I'm asking is like, when you look at a project like the Fractured Alpha or Fractured MMO, and you're trying to judge whether or not it could be a good project or whether you should support it, you should actually take the time to like critically evaluate that. Don't just look at it and think, $150, that's me, that's too much money. No, click on it, look at what their goals are, right? Like their principles. Look at that here. What's the overview for this project? What do they have in mind? Like, what are they working on? Like, what's their Fractured Kickstarter? What were their initial goals? Are they realistic? Does the game look like it's far enough along for an alpha game? Did they reach the amount of funding that they were intending to raise? Right? These are how you answer the question of whether or not you should support a game. And the reason why I bring up the Fractured MMO is, frankly speaking, I think it's one of the best cases of this. I think it's one of the best examples of a game that has a very tangible, realistic goal, has a very realistic funding source, and has a very fair crowdfunding model. Now, whether or not it ends up being good or not, we won't know until it basically releases as a game. But I just ask you guys to be a little bit more open to at least like doing some sort of research when you look at a new Kickstarter game, and don't just blindly hate it. I know I'm ranting a bit today, guys, but my main point to you guys is when a new game is released, new trailer, new Kickstarter, new AAA project, whatever it is, don't just hate it because you expect it to be bad, because statistically speaking, most MMOs don't end up being so well. Actually evaluate the game. Does it look fair? Does it look like a cash grab? Does it look like it's worth the money? Is it far enough along in development? Do I want to spend money or even support it as a crowdfunded game? These are all questions that only you can answer, but the only way that you can answer them is by doing your due diligence and your research. All right. That's my long-winded way of saying that, but I get really annoyed when I see that kind of rhetoric, and for some people it might seem like I'm just like being pedantic and just arguing with random people on Reddit threads, but in reality it's the ideas that are poisonous to me. If we can't actually take the time to use this and this and this to figure out if something is a good thing, then a lot of good things are going to get caught in the crossfire, and that's not what we want. In the case of Fractured, I think it's one of the good ones. So maybe we shouldn't just blindly assume that this is a cash grab or that this is just some Albion clone or whatever else. All right, so I think it's probably about time to go ahead and move to the question segment of the podcast. We call this the call-in segment. Currently speaking, we're a little under an hour and 50 minutes into the podcast, so I will dedicate the next 20 minutes or so to answering questions. I have a couple questions queued up, but if you would like to ask me a question and you haven't already, you can @ me in chat, you can @ Card, you can @ Zila in chat, one of my moderators in charge of gathering the questions. You can also talk to me in Discord, though the Discord chat at this point, with 20 minutes left, is going to be a little bit shorter. But anyway, I just man, I'm excited for new games to come out, and I'm excited for new MMOs to come out. And I think it's time to get out of this rhetoric of like everything is going to be bad always because it's just difficult. It's like, you know what? Why don't we just individually evaluate these games instead of just assuming that they're all going to be bad? Because really, who does that really help in the end? I don't really think it helps anybody. It just makes us all like paranoid and a giant angry mob with like pitchforks and well, nowhere to aim them. All right, so what questions do we have here? All right, so the first question that I want to get to here is, let's see, from ComradeCage. A friend of mine and I got into a bit of a discussion about games that have essentially exploits in the meta, things like animation canceling or parsing in ESO. What is your general opinion on things like that, at least in regards of exploits being used as mechanics? So, funny enough, we've had a little bit of a discussion about this before, but I'll go ahead and get into it because I think it's a fascinating discussion. I obviously am very much interested in competitive environments. I find them, especially in MMOs, sort of how like metas develop and all of that, very interesting. And so using glitches as like basically a mechanic for skill or to increase the level of skill in a game is very common. The best examples I like to present are probably using Super Smash Bros. Melee. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, the game is played at a pretty fast speed, just, you know, on a base level. But players from testing the game found that if they air dodge into the ground at the perfect frame, I think the first couple of frames, whenever they're getting back to the ground level, they can dodge right at that moment. They can then allow themselves to land without having the same amount of lag. And so what that means, and I'll just show you guys an example. Let's see, wave dashing. As you can imagine, once this was discovered, it completely changed the speed of which the game was played. You see how his character is dashing in and dashing out so quickly? That's called a wave dash. He's dodging at the very last second towards the ground and angling it to where he can use it as a movement option. And this is a very, very well-established feature of the game, and frankly speaking, one of its actually most controversial. Controversial because it's clearly a bug and a glitch that was not originally intended. That being said, it greatly increases the speed and also the skill of the way that the game plays. So people often argue, well, if it's a glitch, but it increases the skill level, should we then patch it out, or would that be ruining the meta to some extent? And I mean, that's a very hard question to answer. In many games, it inherently does affect the meta if you do patch such a problem or glitch out of the game. And, you know, there's plenty of other examples of this. For example, Halo 2, if I could show you guys on stream, I would, but unfortunately I can't. But there's very common glitches in Halo 2. Every competitive player knows about these glitches. The first one is called, well, he's not doing it there. Here we go. The first one is a BXB, which allows you to get the melee off while also pressing X to buffer your attack to then land another melee. The one that he just showed there is called BXR. BXR is the concept of, in Halo, whenever you melee, your character locks into your to the enemy character. As you notice here, he has his crosshair right on his face. Whenever he does the melee animation, and it happens so fast, by the way, and BXRing really did happen this fast back in the day, so let me slow this down for you guys. If you notice, he does the interaction basically right as he's meleeing. So he immediately melees, which puts him in range in order to get an easy headshot off, which he then gets a free kill, right? Mind you, the target is standing there. When people are moving, it's much harder to get a BXR on a target that's moving. But when a target's standing, as you can see here, a BXR is basically the best way to kill a target. Now, that might seem OP to you. You might be of the, I don't know, you might be of the school of thought that that's a glitch and therefore it should be taken out of the game. But you can also admit that it does increase the level of which you can play the game at. And what I mean by that is that by having more mechanically intensive things, it becomes harder to play the game, which increases the skill level. So that's the good part about it. The bad part is that essentially the meta is glitching. And so that, for some people, becomes a huge point of contention. And I'm going to show you guys a perfect example of that. In Darkfall Online, one of my favorite MMOs, there's a concept called bunny hopping. This is one of the most controversial features of the entire game, and I'm going to show you why. Imagine you're being chased by a big group of people, and your mount is dead, and you have no way to escape, except you're playing a physics-based game, and just like in most physics-based games, Tribes and Quake included, you can move faster if you propel yourself. So guess what people figured out that they can do? I'm good at shooting people, cracking wine. They figured out that in Darkfall Online, if you use a movement option to then propel yourself across the map while jumping, you can carry your momentum forward. And if you notice, the guy's health doesn't go low enough because you cannot die from fall damage in Darkfall Online Original. And so for some people, this looks awesome. This is the ability for a single player to basically escape anybody chasing them down. You're telling me I can reposition myself at any time without having to worry about, you know, whatever particular person catching up to me? Look at this. At a single instance, I can decide, you know what? I'm out of here. And then all of a sudden, I start bunny hopping. For many people, this is a horrible mechanic that they hate. They swear by hating this mechanic. Do you guys have a guess as to why people hate the mechanic? I want you guys to answer this one. Why do you think people dislike this mechanic besides it being a glitch? It's a simple answer, a really simple answer. All right, we've got some good answers here. Limpos with it looks horrid, which is not on topic. Ludin says mad cause bad, which is pretty much. Zila says that he's talking about Halo campaign, where you can reload a weapon and exchange it with another weapon so you don't use up any ammunition. I do remember that, actually. Comrade says because they're harder to kill. Chrysius says people are unable to do it. Lion says it's an easy escape for positioning. And Braz Monkey says it allows for bad positioning. All of those things are true. The main reason, and I was there, so I heard the majority of people's complaints. The majority of the reasons why people didn't like bunny hopping was simply because it was hard to do. It took time and effort to learn how to properly time the jump and subsequent jumps. Because he's timing this jump every single time. This is not a macro. This is not automatic. You see how if he doesn't do it properly, he immediately loses his momentum. See how he's carrying his momentum here? He incorrectly jumps, and watch what happens. His momentum immediately stops and slows down. And so it's a very skill-intensive thing, but as other people have pointed out, it kind of ruins group dynamics and group meta. Because let's say we have a holy trinity of sorts. Well, what point is my holy trinity if I don't need a tank to protect me and I don't need a healer to protect me because I can just bunny hop away at any time, right? You see, so it's like, it can have unforeseen problems that people don't even think about on first glance. And so really, this is my long-winded way of saying it's a really hard question to answer. It's so hard to answer that question because you have to ask yourself as a developer, if I remove this feature, is it because I'm removing it just because it's a bug? Or am I removing it because it's a bug that essentially people have to learn, which has too high of an inherent skill level? In the case of wave dashing, in Melee, it's very difficult to do. In fact, I play Melee and I can't do it regularly. Wave dashing is not easy to do. Bunny hopping for me is very easy, but I played Darkfall for a long time, so I don't have any problems bunny hopping. But imagine if you're playing Melee and you can't wave dash. You basically can't play the game. Imagine if you're playing Darkfall Online and you can't bunny hop. You can't play the game in small numbers. You need a bigger group to protect you. So the point is that it's a careful balance of, like, you don't want to ruin the game's meta by allowing for bugs to be in the game. But at the same time, if a bug kind of happens and it inherently increases the skill level, you shouldn't just immediately think to get rid of it because it's a bug. Because if it does actually increase the skill level and maybe actually the complexity of the overall game, there might be an argument as to why you'd be okay with it. So I'm not going to make a necessary... I know I'm fence sitting here a little bit. I can see both sides of the argument, which I don't necessarily like saying because it makes me sound like I'm being a centrist. But it's just like, in Darkfall's case, I believe ultimately they were wrong in allowing bunny hopping to be so prevalent for so long. And my reasoning is for that, and I can explain this because I was a part of the meta, is that because you couldn't die from fall damage, there's essentially no risk to doing bunny hopping except getting hit by a stray projectile from across the way, which is a very low chance if you know how to bunny hop properly and you can use terrain to your advantage. So that was actually a thing that was fixed in later Darkfalls. They allowed you to die from fall damage. That way you couldn't just literally bunny hop endlessly. So it's like, you don't have to remove the mechanic. You can just find ways to balance it. That was a way to balance it. In the case of Super Smash Bros. Melee, they did something similar, funny enough, with Ultimate. And Ultimate, you technically can wave dash, right? You technically can wave dash in this game. It's not nearly, though, as effective as it was in Melee. And that's partly because of the engine, but also partly because of the speed. So when you watch him do a wave dash here, notice how you see that there's still a little bit of delay, in lag, they call it, whenever he hits the ground. It's still very much viable as an option to get back to the ground quickly, or potentially if you're on a platform and you want to fast fall onto a platform. So the point being is that wave dashing technically is still important. So they didn't completely nerf it or make it pointless. But here's the even funnier thing. This is after Melee. So that means that the team behind Melee knew, or Sakurai, sorry, in particular, everyone loves to say Sakurai's like the only guy, but Sakurai knew what wave dashing was. He knew it was in Melee, and he knew it was a prominent feature. And so instead of just completely removing it, he made sure that it was still somewhat of a mechanic in Smash Ultimate. So these are 2 points that I bring up of how you can have something that's like glitch-based and definitely increases the skill level, while at the same time it could alienate your more casual audience. And so the best option is not to just say, fuck it, unless that's your vision for your game, which in the case of Darkfall was its essentially biggest downfall, was that they didn't compromise fast enough, essentially. But if you look at Smash Ultimate, they're trying to have some sort of compromise here to where you can still have different movement options while not just being downright the best movement option that you have to do 24/7 of the time, or 24/7, 100% of the time, because that's how it is in Melee. When you watch anybody play Melee, let's watch some pros play Melee in the past year. Competitive Melee is ridiculous. All right, I want you guys to watch how fast these characters move. Okay, this is not the best video. I want an actual match here. Okay, this is a pretty famous match. Mewtwo King versus Mango. I want you guys to notice how fast the movement options look. And what you can notice if you pay attention is part of it is dash dancing, right? He's dashing back and forth, but he's actually wave dashing into the ground. He's dodging into the ground over and over again so he can buffer his attacks and make them much faster. Now, again, many of you could argue this is way too difficult. This is way too competitive. This is not fair to have in a game. That's a very fair criticism. I can't necessarily just outright disagree with you. That being said, is the answer just completely removing it? I would probably disagree. And so if we want to bring it back to MMOs, you brought up, Comrade brought up ESO as an example. ESO, funny enough for me, as an example, is a pretty horrible example. And what I mean by that is that animation canceling exists in ESO because the engine is essentially shit. Like, I'm sorry, it exists in that game because you need a way to buffer things, because animations are so problematic. That's my problem with it, is that when you have bugs that exist essentially because of a detriment in the game, or like a problem in the game, and they don't get fixed essentially because you don't want to fix said problem, I kind of have a problem with that myself. Like, is animation canceling in ESO the same thing as wave dashing in Melee? No, it's not. Not even close, dude. Because you don't have to wave dash in Melee necessarily. There's players who don't do it, very frequently, but it automatically does make you kind of like a better player because it just increases your options and increases your speed. In the case of Elder Scrolls Online, my problem with it is that although it might increase the skill cap, that's kind of like saying, I don't know, you're the smartest 18-year-old in a kindergarten class. It's sort of one of those things where it's like, even if you are, is it really that impressive? Is increasing the skill cap by allowing animation canceling in ESO really going to drastically change the game? Probably not. Is it important enough to be used by everybody? Probably not. But does it mean then by, essentially by definition that it's okay to have in your game? I don't know. I would probably say have a better game first. Like, have a better combat system first. That way you don't have to rely on systems that necessarily aren't native to your game. Like, let's watch an example of this. And by the way, I saw your point card. I'll try and wrap this one up. But whenever you talk about game theory and game design in particular, it just kind of requires you to show people examples. Because otherwise, I'm just sitting up here just talking bullshit, basically. All right, so animation canceling is what any good player in this game does, essentially. And it's, instead of having to have a typical GCD, as you notice, he gets to start his GCD over instead of immediately having to be put into a 1 second, 0.5 second GCD and then do an animation. So because animations are so poor in ESO, that's why he has to do this. That's kind of how I see it. And I mentioned this before. Because animations in this game look like you're basically playing like... honestly, I'm not really sure because, like, I don't even know how I would personally describe this game other than it just feels like it's floaty. It feels floaty. It feels like disconnected. My attacks don't really feel like they're having the same level of impact. And all of that is just basically... I would say it's like magnified in a game that kind of allows you to do animation canceling. So I would say that my problem is that it makes the game look worse in this case, but not just look worse. I'm not really convinced it's needed, if that makes sense. I feel like this is something that could be easily fixed by the developers, but they just don't really care enough to, I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, if it's something that doesn't require a lot of skill to do, why are you making it a base mechanic? Why not just patch it out? That's different than wave dashing. Remember, wave dashing is difficult to do. So the argument for wave dashing or not having wave dashing is simple. Not having it is because it's difficult to do, and it also increases a lot of your skill level. And the positives of having it is it increases the skill level. In ESO's case, allowing animation canceling is kind of like this. You allow it because you have a problem with your animations. So instead of fixing your problem with your animations or your GCD, you just allow for this bug or problem. Frankly speaking, I don't think it's hard to do animation canceling at all in this game. In fact, I figured it out on accident. Like, I didn't even know I was doing it when I first tried it, but I was just like doing things and I was like, because I can figure that shit out basically on my own these days because I play so many MMOs that I can tell that they have certain problems in the game. Is it really adding so much to the skill level? I'm not really convinced. So I think that's kind of my opinion on that. That was my long-winded way of answering that question. So thank you for asking that. That's kind of my point. I think I wrapped it up. Finally. Okay, so some more questions. Let's go ahead and get to those. All right, iRamies asks, speaking of monthly content, do you know about the latest Hitman system of elusive targets? Yes, I do, actually. A timed mission on every couple of weeks where you can try to kill a unique target. Say voiced by Sean Bean or Garey Busy. Garey Busy? The Busy? Garey Busy? And after that period of time, you can't access that content. It's always online single-player game, almost. Do you think it's a good approach for single-player games in general, or not? Funny enough, IOS, is it IDOS Online Interactive? Is that what they call themselves these days? I'm not even sure. I know that they're like a subsidiary of Square Enix, but or at least no, They were a subsidiary. Aren't they an independent company now? In fact, aren't they a Danish company? Sorry. I can't really remember. Anyway, because they do publish monthly roadmaps with future targets and challenges. Anytime you say always online single player game, you're gonna have me kind of like scared, I would say. They are not? Okay. They're under WB now? Huh. I did not know that. Hitman is made in Denmark. Yeah, I'm glad I pointed that out before. But anyway, anytime I hear single player online games, I get a little bit worried because I'm just thinking to myself, like, basically it's like DRM. It's like always online DRM, which I know has some people like very sensitive about. I'm not nearly as sensitive about it, and not to mention I enjoy the Hitman franchise. In particular, I did enjoy the first game. And sorry, when I mean first game, I mean first game of its name, as in just like the Hitman game. I also liked Hitman 1. I also liked Hitman Blood Money. I also liked Hitman Silent Assassin. What's the other Hitman? I can't remember what the other one was, but it was the one that came out on the next generation of consoles. I like the games, but I don't know if that has anything to do with whether or not I see it as a good idea. I like the idea of them using their elusive targets in the Hitman kind of like mythos to constantly be adding more content to the game. I like that aspect because why not add more replayability if it doesn't take you that much effort, right? I mean, it doesn't take that much effort. But here's a cooler idea. And this is a bit off topic, but here's my cooler idea. What if they just gave you a sandbox? Like, what I've been wanting in Hitman for so many years is just give me a damn sandbox and let me create my own story. Let me create my own Hitman. Let me create my own hit, if you will. Let me create my Absolution. That was it. Impost. Thank you. Absolution was kind of like Double Agent for... No, it was worse than Double Agent. It was like Conviction. It was like Splinter Cell Conviction, where it's a lot more just about killing things and like fighting than it is actually like doing the secret missions or doing the secret assassinations. But yeah, anyway, I'll put a bow on that and just say that in the case of Hitman, I kind of wish they would just let me have a sandbox instead of just having to do developer-made content. But I can't help but feel like there's a reason that they do that, and that's because it's more monetarily feasible, I guess I would say. All right, so Sacralatius. Is that Sacralatius? I think is how you pronounce that. Sorry, the Hispanic in me wants to say Sacralatius, but have you seen the now rather old video by Mr. B-Tongue called Unruining the MMO on YouTube? If so, what's your opinion of it? Unruining the MMO. I don't have time to watch this now, but I will definitely check it out sometime. Watch later. All right, I'll add that to the list and I'll have to get back to you on it. Because I do like to hear what other people's thoughts are on the MMO market in general. I will say that I'm very hesitant of when people make broad, proclamations of an entire genre. That's one thing you won't really see me do a whole lot of because I'm a little bit worried because really, like, the MMO genre is so giant. There's so many types of games within it, so that's just my first concern. But yeah, I'll be eager to watch this video and I'll tell you what I think about it as soon as I find out more about it and watch it later on today. All right, so any more questions or am I kind of reaching the end here? We should be reaching the end just in general of the podcast. I'm giving you guys 4 more minutes to ask any other questions, and after that, I think we will be calling it. So, do I play stealth games? Absolutely. Yes, I enjoyed Thief. I loved Splinter Cell as a kid. I loved Hitman as a kid, and I also grew up playing what's that other stealth game like? Man, can't remember it off the top of my head. I guess every Elder Scrolls game is a stealth game, am I right? Okay, did I miss any questions? You should check out Borp. He's a competitive melee player who doesn't tech at all. Braz Monkey, I actually am very aware of Borp. If you guys don't know this about me, I'll let you guys know now. I'm a massive esport fan. Anything I play, I'm obsessed with it. So, like, I play Smash Ultimate. I watched a lot of Smash, like Melee, Smash 4, You name it. I'm one of those people that whenever I start playing something, I'm all into it. Like, I want to hear about everything about it. I want to read about everything. That's just kind of how I am. Like, the things that I very much enjoy in my life, I'm all in. So video games, as you can see, I kind of like video games, kind of like anime, kind of like, you know, Sherlock Holmes, kind of like reading, right? I love the gorillas. That's another example. Anything you see me supporting generally, it's something that I like support. Like I'm completely all into it. Martial arts, you know, I train 3 to 4 times a week. Video games, I play video games every single day. Like at least 3 to 4 hours every single day. Even if it's just Pokemon or just Smash, or even if it's non-MMOs, I always make it a point to play video games because they're awesome. There's no other way to explain that. What are your thoughts on Tencent's game store, Wii Game X? It just launched today. No comment. Sorry, I've always wanted to say that. Saturday Night Live TV. Pokemon MMOs. There are some with great in-game economy. Why does Game Freak keep sleeping on the Nintendo Game Boy stuff? You know what? We talked about this before, and I feel like I can just rant about it endlessly at this point because I love the Pokemon franchise, and I'm completely bewildered as to how it's not an MMO. I really am. I truly am. I'm not just saying that. I get it. There's historical reasons. Japanese companies don't typically make MMOs, and also Game Freak isn't an MMO company. But that being said, I mean, is there any other layup besides the Pokemon universe in the MMO world? I mean, you can re-level characters, you can trade characters, you can breed characters, you can compete amongst each other, you could allow for people to own their own gyms or compete at their own gyms, have their own Final Fours. I mean, like, do I really have to keep going on about this stuff? Like, I love Pokemon, and it's a complete, utter, like, question mark in my brain as to why it hasn't already been an MMO. Be fair, there's tons of fan projects out there that do pretty damn good jobs, I've tested them, of being MMOs, but ultimately speaking, they aren't MMOs. The video basically talks about the influence that WoW had on the MMO genre, kind of like the Michael Jordan of MMOs. Fair enough, that sounds like a video that I'd be interested in watching. Thank you. What's your opinion on review bombing of, what's BL3? Sorry, I'm not the best with acronyms whenever I don't play the particular games. I should know what it is, and for some reason it's not ringing a bell. Borderlands? Do they call Borderlands BL? I guess I'm not familiar with the terminology with Borderlands. Alright, Borderlands is L's? Okay. So BL. So what's my opinion on the review bombing of Borderlands 2, I'm assuming? Because I don't know if 3's out yet. Exactly. Yeah, okay, gotcha. Everyone says it's number 2. But that he was referencing Borderlands 3. Gotcha. Well, I've mentioned my opinions of review bombing already. Do I think review bombing can work? Yes. Do I think randomly lynching people that you think to be a witch could work? Yes. Does that kind of make my point? Sometimes random lynchings work. Maybe you get a criminal. Maybe you get the guy who stole some shit. Maybe you get the person who was going to steal some shit. Maybe you just hang innocent people. That's kind of my problem of these whole mob mentality styles, where it's just kind of like, review bombing to me is, I don't know, it kind of reminds me of just like Salem witch trial shit. It's just like, hey, you're wrong. Let's just all pile onto you and hope that we can show everybody that you're wrong. It's like, how about we just actually explain why you're wrong? I don't know. That's just me. Like, why don't, when we review Borderlands 2, we just review Borderlands 2? And then how about whenever Borderlands 3 comes out, we don't buy the game? How about that? Because that's really the only decision that companies ultimately feel. And to provide evidence to this statement, since I don't want to just throw some shit out there, I'll show you guys my favorite game in the world. Woohoo! Ark Survival Evolved. Ark Survival Evolved, guys, according to Steam Spy, has sold over 5 million copies. 5 million copies. This is a game that has this kind of reception. 6 out of 10 out of 167,000 reviews. So my point is that sometimes just putting negativity out there that isn't based on the game itself, it actually isn't enough to dissuade them from continuing to make money off of the game. Instead, what keeps companies like Wildcard from making more shit games is you just don't buy their games. You just don't buy them. You stop buying their games. That's how you teach them a lesson. You don't buy their games anymore. Why am I going to buy a game just to leave a bad review? It doesn't really make sense. This whole outrage culture of like, you need to like loudly explain everything that you feel or think about a particular company on a setting or in a setting or medium that isn't really meant for that. And sorry, like my personal opinion is that game reviews are for game reviews. Like Steam reviews are for game reviews. You talk about the game, you talk about the aspects concerning the game, and that's it. Like, I don't think you should really be talking about a whole lot other at the end of the day. But again, that's just my personal opinion. I am not convinced that because review bombing can work, it's therefore the best thing to do. So a perfect example of this is, let's say I'm a developer and my name is I Develop Games. That's the name of my company. I Develop Games. And I've come up with a really cool, awesome RPG game that everybody wants to try out. And then news hits the web that it's going to be an Epic Store exclusive. And so the 5-year-old like volunteer project I made on Steam like ages ago now is getting like review bombed. It's like, all right, okay. Let's see if that, let's pretend that actually matters and it does do something. Is my game good? You don't even know. You're not even willing to find out if it's any good. You're just so mad that a business decision was made, which, by the way, is out of my hands, and you want to basically be mad at me for that. And so I don't want to completely take away developers from having any sort of like, what's the word? Any sort of responsibility here. But I mean, let's say I'm a developer. I need someone to fund my game. I go to Electronic Arts. Electronic Arts announces, sorry, bad example, because they would put it on Origin. All right, let's play that one through then. Electronic Arts is like, nope, you're launching this as an exclusive on Origin. Okay. What can I do exactly? They funded me. They have publishing rights in my game. They also can fold me if I don't pay them back essentially what they're owed. Sorry. What are my options here? My options are fail, shut my company down, or say, fuck, you know what? What are you going to do? I made a great game, you know? I hope people can still at least notice that. I didn't want to come out as an Epic Store exclusive, but it's not my fault. I didn't have any choice, right? And so that's kind of like where I have problems with this. Like, you have to be careful because you don't really know what happens behind the scenes, and you don't know if it was the developer who was part of the decision making or not. In the case of Obsidian, as far as we know, the base level developers, like aka the non-founding members, they didn't even know that The Outer Worlds was going to be an exclusive on Epic. They didn't even know that. So why are you going to go then shit talk, I don't know, Fallout New Vegas? You know what I'm saying? It just, I don't know. For me, it's just completely disconnected, but I see the idea of it because if you can make them see that you're review bombing them, maybe they would then do something about it. I'm sorry, people are a little bit naive. Do you honestly think that negatively reviewing an old game that's already sold X amount of copies is really going to be the driving force as to why they decide that their next game is not going to launch on the exclusive platform all after they've already picked up the paycheck for having it on the exclusive platform? It's just really idealistic, I think, to think that it's going to have a big impact. Does it affect things? Yes. And what level? I think it's like this level. Not very big. It doesn't have a big impact. Why don't we just not buy things that we don't like or support? And why don't we just review things based on the integrity of the game itself? Now, I'm not going to say that you can't look at something historically to provide context when you do a review. I think that's very important. It just means that don't be one of those guys who says, lol, Epic Store exclusive, and leave a negative review. I don't really feel like you're helping this. I don't feel like you're helping this. I really don't. All right, so I think that's reached the end of the podcast. I don't have any more questions, and so I'm going to go ahead and stop it. I'd like to thank everybody for stopping by and being a part of the podcast today. We had nearly 50 viewers the whole time, so that's pretty impressive. And today was a day that I definitely felt like, because there were so many things to talk about, I wish that I would have did a little bit more preparation in the beginning, but I finished my video for the Secret World. I was excited about that. I took some time off of not having to just, write and do all my research over and over again, so we kind of worked through some of these problems and topics kind of together, I feel like. And that's what I like about the podcast is it's like when you guys can ask me some questions, I'm working it through with you guys. Like, I don't have all the answers. Like, I might be wearing a fedora, but it doesn't mean that my brain is so big that it can't be contained underneath this thing. It's like, no, it's there. My brain is still underneath all of that. I'm still human. I can be wrong about things. So, yeah, it was fun working through a lot of this stuff today with you guys, and really interesting questions, and I'm glad that you guys made this podcast one of the most enjoyable ones yet. So thank you guys for your help. Thank you for your support. Thank you for enjoying the Secret World video. I hope you guys enjoyed it at least. And updates as for content. I mean, besides the old dead... I don't know if I'll use the dead cat or dead horse argument. But I will say that I talk about it a lot, but that Patreon video is coming, okay? We worked out some details in the finer bits and obviously pivoted to work on the Secret World first. But the other good news is I already completed the script and the voiceover for my Kickstarter MMO report card video. So that one is basically just being edited right now, and then it'll be finished. So that's pretty much an update for all my content at the moment. I'll see you guys next Monday for the podcast. And remember, you forgot, on the 22nd, I'm doing a podcast live with none other than Chris Avalon. So stay tuned for that one. That one will start 2 hours after the normal time, but don't worry about that yet. That's not next week. That's the week after that. We're going to talk about a lot of things, so I can't wait for that. And yeah, anyway, just beating the bush. So thank you guys for stopping by. I give you the deepest of fedora tips, and appreciate the support as always, as I said. Thank you for watching. I'll see you later, guys.